What if the softest prison is the one you never knew you were in? Not a cage of iron, not a locked room, but a gentle tug on your thoughts, a whisper disguised as your own voice, a choice that was never truly yours. Tonight, we're not chasing monsters in the dark. We're listening for the ones that wear perfume and smile warmly, the kind that shape your decisions without a single command, the ones that twist your mind with silk, not chains. This isn't about fear, it's about awareness, because manipulation doesn't always shout. Sometimes it sighs, sometimes it hides behind compliments, behind silence, behind the illusion of love. So as you lie back, let your breath slow, let your guard fall, not to danger, but to understanding. We'll wander gently through 100 invisible threads, and maybe, just maybe, unravel the ones you never knew were there. Welcome to the quiet theater of the mind. Let us begin. The invisible strings of influence. You walk into a room and feel welcomed, but no one says a word. Someone tilts their head just slightly, gestures gently toward a chair. You sit, not because they told you to, but because it felt natural, felt right. And that's where it begins. Logically, you make hundreds of tiny decisions that feel like yours. Which seat to take, when to speak, whether to trust someone. But beneath that quiet confidence lies something else, something softer than command, quieter than persuasion, influence. It hums beneath the surface like a faint melody you didn't realize you were dancing to. Funny how people always sit near the window first, one stranger says to another, sipping from a paper cup. The second one glances over. Maybe it's not the view. Maybe it just feels like an exit. And just like that, you see it. How even passing thoughts can shape behavior. Not because they're orders, but because they glide under your awareness, dressed as harmless observation. Subtle manipulation isn't sinister in the way stories often suggest. There's no villain in the shadows, no stage hypnotist snapping fingers. It's the friend who lowers their voice just enough to make you lean in. The colleague who says, "I'm sure you've already thought of this," before planting their idea. The cashier who pauses a heartbeat longer after asking, "Would you like to upgrade?" And suddenly, you do. Not because they forced you, but because their pause became an invitation, and your brain rushed to fill the silence with agreement. It's not magic, it's timing, tone, framing. The mind is wired to respond to cues long before it reasons through logic. That's why a pause can carry more weight than a paragraph. Why a raised eyebrow can reshape a conversation. Why the absence of a question can feel like pressure all the same. You may never hear the strings, but you move with them, gently swayed by the subtle gravity of social cues. You ever wonder? One woman whispers, "Why I always compliment your choices before I offer mine?" The man laughs, "Because I trust you more when I feel seen." She smiles, "Exactly. And now, you'll hear it every time. When influence becomes invisible, freedom becomes soft, not gone, but filtered, diluted. If someone can steer your steps without touching your beliefs, are you still walking your own path? Or are you on a stage, following marks you can't see? There's no shame in not noticing. This is how humans evolved, to mirror, to harmonize, to belong. But awareness, even a sliver of it, gives you back the reins. So tonight, as your breath slows and the world turns quieter, just know it's okay to drift. You can trust the calm. These thoughts aren't instructions, just passing clouds. And now, let's take one more step into the maze of the mind, toward a mirror that often reflects others more than it reflects ourselves. The Chameleon Reflex. In the dim glow of a late evening conversation, something strange often happens, and it's so subtle, you almost never notice it. You're sipping your drink, laughing at a story, and the person across from you suddenly mirrors the way you lean your head, the way you hold your glass, even the rhythm of your laughter. At first, it feels comforting, like a shared rhythm you both naturally slipped into. But what if that reflection wasn't natural at all? This is the chameleon reflex, our instinctive, often unconscious urge to mimic the people we're drawn to. It's built deep into us, hardwired through evolution. Back in the earliest days of tribal survival, blending in with the group meant safety. Imitating others wasn't about deception, it was about bonding. It told the tribe, I'm one of you. And most of the time, even now, it's innocent. When you like someone, you naturally pick up on their phrases, their gestures, their emotional tone. Your brain is trying to sync, to empathize, to connect. But like every tool of the mind, mirroring has a darker side. When done with intent, it stops being connection and becomes control. Have you ever noticed? A soft voice asks in the quiet of a memory, how she always laughed exactly when I did, like she rehearsed it. Yeah, someone answers, slowly piecing it together. I thought that meant she really got me, but maybe she just studied me. Manipulators, the kind who seek to disarm trust quickly, often use mirroring as a weapon. They wear your movements like a second skin, not to understand you, but to invade you, to fast-track their way past your boundaries. Because when you see someone behaving like you, your brain lights up with the illusion of familiarity. You think, they're just like me. You relax your guard. But what you don't realize is that the person across from you isn't showing their true self. They're reflecting you, like a mirror, cold and silent, giving back only what you offer, until you forget that they've told you nothing at all. And so, a false intimacy begins. But what happens when that mirror cracks? When you finally ask a deeper question and there's no real answer? When you realize the warmth you felt was your own warmth, bounced back at you? The betrayal doesn't come from an action. It comes from the absence of truth, because you were never really seen. You were only studied. And once that spell breaks, you start looking back at every echo and every nod and wonder, was any of it real? Trust, once mirrored and then broken, leaves behind a hollow silence, a silence more deafening than any argument could be. Because in the space where connection should have grown, there was only mimicry, an empty performance dressed as closeness. Next, let's explore how silence isn't always absence, but sometimes a louder manipulation than words could ever be. The power of the pause. There's a strange kind of music in silence, not the kind that soothes, but the kind that sharpens the edges of awareness. In the theater of conversation, a well-placed pause doesn't just fill the space, it transforms it. Words may guide a dialogue, but silence controls it. Did I say something wrong? She asked softly, looking across the table. He met her gaze and said nothing, just held it. A beat passed, then another, and suddenly she was doing the talking for both of them. This is the hidden weight of the pause. Not a passive stillness, but an active force. A space charged with meaning. Most people rush to fill that space, scrambling to ease the tension. But a skilled manipulator doesn't speak. They wait. They let the silence do the heavy lifting. Think of a courtroom. A witness hesitates for just one moment too long, and the jury leans forward. That pause doesn't need to say anything. It already has. In that gap, imagination rushes in. Doubt grows. Assumptions form. The listener begins writing a story the speaker never told. Why did she stop? Was he hiding something? Am I supposed to answer that? In human conversation, the pause becomes a mirror, one that doesn't reflect your face, but your thoughts, your insecurities. Strategic silence exploits our discomfort with uncertainty, and in that discomfort, people reveal more than they ever meant to. "Hey," he said, stepping into the elevator just before the doors closed. "Did I interrupt?" The woman inside glanced up, confused. He smiled, but said nothing more. By the time the elevator reached the 4th floor, she'd already justified his presence to herself. He must work upstairs, or maybe he's new. Notice how the pause didn't break the connection. It forged one. Because in the absence of explanation, our minds provide one. This is the real magic. Silence plants questions we can't help but answer. In everyday life, we underestimate this. A friend pauses too long after you share something vulnerable, and your mind spirals. Did they disapprove? Were they shocked? Were they bored? You end up handing them more of yourself just to fix a silence that wasn't even yours. The pause is not a void. It's an invitation, sometimes gentle, sometimes laced with pressure. And the most dangerous part? We rarely notice it until we've filled it with our own confessions. A child once asked, "Why didn't you say anything back if you didn't agree?" And the mother replied, "Because silence can be louder than shouting, especially when someone's listening for what they want to hear." So here, as you lie with eyes gently closed, you might recall a time when someone's silence said more than their words ever could. A pause between texts, a look held a second too long, a question left unanswered. That wasn't absence, it was orchestration. But don't worry. In this space, there's no judgment, just the quiet unfolding of insight, a thought that drifts like a feather down a well of memory. Let it pass. Let it soften. Because now, we trace the ripple of a compliment, not to your heart, but to your decision-making center. The compliment hook. It starts softly, almost like music. "You're so insightful," they say. Or maybe, "I've never met anyone who understands things quite like you do." At first, it feels like sunlight warming your chest. Your posture relaxes. The conversation flows easier. After all, who doesn't like to be seen? But beneath the glow of praise lies a shadow, a delicate manipulation so subtle, most never see it coming. Compliments are not just nice words, they are emotional keys. Each one, if timed just right, unlocks a door inside you, the door to belief. And not belief in the other person, but belief in yourself as they define you. "Why does that feel so good?" she asked one evening while sipping tea, eyes distant in thought. He replied without looking up, "Because we want it to be true, that we're smart, that we're rare, that we matter more than the others in the room." This need to be affirmed, to be special, is not weakness. It's human, but when flattery is used not to uplift, but to steer, then we must ask ourselves, who's really in control? Imagine someone praises your wisdom just before asking for your agreement, or compliments your generosity before requesting a favor. Suddenly, you're more likely to say yes, because saying no feels like denying the version of yourself you just fell in love with. That's the trap. You aren't defending against the request, you're defending your own identity. Now pause, reflect. Has this ever happened to you? A friend compliments your creativity, then pushes you to take on a task you weren't sure about. A coworker calls you brilliant, then casually suggests you handle the hard part of the project. It didn't feel like pressure. It felt like validation. And that's what makes it dangerous. "I don't think they meant to manipulate me," she said later, curling up under a blanket. "Maybe not," he replied, "but intentions don't erase outcomes. And praise, it can blind." What makes the compliment hook so effective is that it masquerades as kindness. Unlike threats or guilt, which often trigger our defenses, flattery bypasses the firewall. It slides in through the heart, and once it's there, it rewires your perception. You don't just trust them. You want to protect their view of you. So the next time someone offers you praise, sit with it. Enjoy it, but quietly ask, is this truth or bait? Are they seeing me or shaping me? Because sometimes a compliment isn't just a gift, it's a leash made of gold. Let's dive now into the next layer, the hidden costs of favor. What happens when gifts aren't given, but loaned, with invisible strings attached? The debt of kindness. A man at the subway hands you a bottle of water. No reason. Just says, "You looked like you needed it." You take it, smile, thank him, and then, strangely, you feel something stir inside. A quiet pressure, the feeling that you should do something in return. Maybe offer your seat. Maybe just listen. It's not loud, but it lingers. This soft thread of obligation is called the rule of reciprocity, and it's older than language itself. Across cultures and centuries, humans have survived by exchanging goodwill. I help you today, you help me tomorrow. It kept fires warm and stomachs full, but when wielded with quiet precision, it stops being a gesture of trust and becomes a trap. You see, when someone offers kindness without asking, your defenses drop, not because you're weak, but because you're wired for fairness. Even the smallest act, a favor, a compliment, a smile, can become a psychological hook. The moment you accept it, your mind opens a little window. Now I owe them something, not in words, not always in conscious thought, but in feeling, in subtle readiness to yield. And some people, they know that. "So he bought you lunch?" "Yeah, just said he wanted to treat me." "Did he ask for anything?" "Not really, but then he mentioned his project. And I felt like I had to say yes, because he fed you, because he was nice." That's how it works. The favor is the seed. What grows is often hidden beneath the surface, a sense of indebtedness that's hard to name, but harder to shake. Even when you know it's being used on purpose, part of you still leans forward, still says yes. And you wonder later, why? Is generosity still noble if it's calculated? Is kindness real if it comes with invisible strings? There's an old phrase, no such thing as a free lunch. It sounds cynical, but in psychology, it's unsettlingly true. In marketing, you're handed a gift sample, so you stay longer. In relationships, someone listens deeply, then asks for a favor. And in social settings, a stranger helps you with your suitcase, then expects your number. It's not always sinister, but it's effective. The debt of kindness doesn't demand repayment. It whispers it. And when you're tired, when your social filter softens with exhaustion or trust, these whispers carry weight. They guide your decisions, your consent, your comfort. Until one day, you look back and realize half your choices weren't really yours. They were echoes of small kindnesses that tilted your balance. And yet, does knowing this mean you should reject every gesture? Close your heart to warmth, just to avoid being nudged? Not necessarily, but awareness sharpens vision, and in the stillness of your mind, you can begin to sense the difference between a gift given freely and a gift placed like bait. As the night deepens, let that awareness loosen your tension, not with suspicion, but with clarity. You are allowed to receive without guilt, and you are allowed to question the cost of what seems free. Now, rest with this thought. Not all kindness binds you. Some just passes through. But others, they hold hands with silence. And silence is where the next manipulation begins. The Art of Omission. It starts quietly, like a page with one sentence missing. You feel like you understand, yet something tugs beneath the words, a pause that lingers, a breath withheld. That's the art of omission. Not what is said, but what is carefully, purposefully left unsaid. Sometimes, the most powerful form of influence isn't a lie. It's the absence of a truth that should have been there. And because nothing feels broken, you don't check for cracks. A story told without the ending. A warning left out of the label. A promise with one condition never spoken aloud. One evening, two people sat on a bench near a quiet fountain. "Did she tell you everything?" he asked softly, eyes tracking the ripples. "Enough," she replied. Or, "I thought it was enough." And they sat in silence, realizing that enough can be a feeling, not a fact. This is how omission works. It coats itself in trust. The words that are spoken feel smooth, reasonable, and even kind. But the space between them? That's where the trap is set. A coworker explains a plan, skipping the one detail that might make you hesitate. A friend tells a story, leaving out the part that would change how you feel about it. Not by accident, but with intention so gentle, it feels like care. "I just didn't want to overwhelm you," they might say. Or, "I figured you'd rather not know." And strangely, that sounds noble, thoughtful. You nod. But when truth becomes fog, you stop moving with certainty. And in that haze, you're easier to guide, one slow step at a time. You begin to rely on their map because your own has no landmarks left. It's subtle, like pulling a thread from a sweater. You don't notice what's missing until the shape is gone. And by then, what you believed isn't what you would have believed if you had the full picture. Late at night, have you ever remembered a conversation and suddenly realized what wasn't said? A tiny silence that now echoes louder than any word. A boy once asked his grandfather, "Why didn't you ever tell me what happened back then?" And the old man, staring into the smoke of his tea, whispered, "Because I wanted you to admire me." That was all. And it said everything. Not all manipulation wears armor. Some of it is just a door left slightly ajar, an edit so elegant you don't even notice the sentence cut from the script. And in that quiet removal, control is claimed. So as you lie here, relaxed, safe, know this. Your awareness is your compass. It doesn't accuse. It just listens for the missing note in the music, not to mistrust the world, but to walk through it awake. And now, gently, we drift into the next unfolding, where agreement is not always consent, where yes can become a leash. Let's listen. The mind is still open. The story is not done. The yes ladder. It often begins with something small, a harmless favor, a question that seems too minor to resist. "Can I ask you something? Mind helping me with this quick thing?" And we say yes, because it feels polite, natural, insignificant. But in that moment, something more intricate takes root. That first yes is not the end of the conversation. It's the beginning of a sequence. This is the yes ladder, a quiet psychological staircase built on our own desire to stay consistent. The mind, once having taken a step in one direction, resists turning back. We crave internal harmony, and that craving can be used against us. Agreeing to a small task subtly reshapes our mental story. I'm helpful, I'm supportive, I said yes before. Why stop now? The next request, a little bigger, slips in easily. Then another, and another. Before we know it, we're carrying burdens we never intended to touch, agreeing to things we'd once have questioned. In this way, manipulation doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the shape of politeness. It masquerades as momentum. Each step seems voluntary. Each yes feels ours. But are they? Two friends sit in a cafe as the rain taps against the window. So, I told him I'd help him move one box, just one. And now it's a whole weekend. He's got me coordinating a truck rental. Why'd you say yes? I don't even know. It just felt weird to stop saying yes halfway through. And there it is. Not coercion, not pressure. Just the inertia of saying yes once too often. The internal tug of war between politeness and discomfort, between harmony and hesitation. This technique works not because we're weak, but because we're human. The mind wants to appear consistent, not just to others, but to itself. Backing out feels like breaking character. So we keep climbing the ladder, rung by rung, unsure how we got this high, unsure how to get back down. But there's a quiet truth resting in the middle of all this. Awareness. When we notice the rhythm, the first request, the second, the pattern forming, we regain our power. Not every yes needs to become a series. Not every agreement must lead to surrender. Sometimes, stepping off the ladder is the bravest move of all. And as we sit in that soft space of thought, of memory, of realization, let's turn now toward something subtler still. That moment when influence hides inside agreement. Not because you were forced, but because it felt like your own idea. And yet, was it? Planting thoughts as your own. There's a strange comfort in thinking, I made this decision. It feels like warmth from within, as if your mind brewed the thought, shaped it, and served it fresh on a silver tray of self-awareness. But sometimes, the tray was prepared long before you even reached the table. In a quiet hallway of memory, someone once whispered, not an opinion, but a question. Nothing forceful, just a curious tilt of the head, a pause in conversation. And then, without realizing it, your thoughts began to spiral, not toward their words, but toward an idea that felt like your own. Do you ever wonder why he was so generous with you? No, but now that you say it, that's how it begins. Not with command, but with space, with suggestion, with a subtle redirect. A woman in a coffee shop leans across the table and smiles. You're always so careful with your words. Have you always been like that? Her friend nods, flattered, never once stopping to ask, why did she bring that up now? This is the quiet art of inception, not in the movie sense, but in the deeply human, deeply unconscious reality of psychological planting. The manipulator doesn't force thoughts, they nurture them. Like a gardener who never says, here's a rose. They simply drop a seed and let your own mind water it. And what happens when you water something? You feel proud when it blooms. That pride is the anchor. It keeps you from questioning. It makes you trust what you believe, because you think you arrived at it, even if someone else paved the path. It's a slow trick built on patience. The best manipulators never rush. They ask, they smile, they stay silent just long enough for you to speak the next sentence and think it's yours. A boy sits beside his friend on a park bench. You've been quieter lately, he says. The other shrugs. Just thinking. But he wasn't, until now. The prompt awakened it, and suddenly the silence had a reason. That's the mystery of these moments. You don't remember who asked the question, but you always remember the answer, because it echoes like truth. And yet, do you question where the question came from? If it slipped in like a breeze, gently brushing past your awareness, did it plant something deeper? Or did it awaken something already there? The thought may seem like yours, but the moment it arrived, it was already halfway inside. So as your breath softens and your thoughts slow, ask yourself, what else have I claimed as mine? That wasn't? Not with fear, just with openness. Because even the deepest ideas can be planted gently, like feathers landing on water. Now drift a little further, and let's explore the illusion of choice, the ultimate sleight of hand, where options are many. But the path was laid before you stepped forward. The illusion of freedom. There's a peculiar comfort in choice. The moment someone says, "You can pick," something in us unclenches. Freedom whispers at the edge of the sentence, and we lean in, grateful. But not all freedom is real. Some are just paintings on locked doors. You may step through them with pride, only to realize later you've never truly left the room. A man walks into a quiet bookstore. The clerk, smiling, offers, "Would you prefer the blue-covered edition or the red?" He picks one, thanks her, and leaves content, never realizing both versions come from the same curated shelf. The story never changed, only the packaging did. And the choice? It was designed. This is the art of the false dichotomy. When someone wants to steer your direction but fears resistance, they offer you paths, 2, sometimes 3, but all paths lead where they want. You can take the stairs or the elevator, they say. They just don't mention that both end at the same locked hallway. "I feel like I made the decision," a voice says softly in the dark, maybe yours. So why do I still feel led? At its core, the illusion of freedom works because we long to feel in charge. The mind seeks autonomy like lungs seek air. When we're handed options, even limited, even scripted, we relax. We settle into the narrative, unaware that the ink was never ours. 2 friends sit in a quiet diner, the kind with flickering lights and a clock that ticks louder after midnight. One stirs his coffee slowly, watching the cream spiral. "You think we really choose our lives?" he asks. The other smiles faintly. "We choose our reactions, maybe not the options." And that's where the subtle manipulation settles, in the space between what feels voluntary and what is orchestrated. It's easier to guide someone gently when they think they're leading the way. The most sophisticated control never shouts. It doesn't shove. It leans back and offers 2 hands, both holding what it always intended. And we, grateful to be asked, pick one with a smile. Does this mean all choice is fake? Number. But it reminds us to ask, who wrote this menu? If every decision feels a little too neat, a little too narrow, maybe it's not a reflection of your will, but someone else's architecture. Still, awareness doesn't breed paranoia. It breeds clarity. A soft light turned on in a room we've walked through blind too many times. You don't have to panic when you spot the frame around the picture. Just recognize it. Step back. Then, perhaps, choose again, on your terms. And if you feel a little tired now, that's okay. Let that thought float. Like mist curling off a lake before sunrise, it doesn't need to settle. Only drift. We've looked at the hands that draw the lines. Next, let's step into a quieter place, where confusion itself becomes a strategy, not a flaw, not an accident, but something deliberate, like fog hiding a path you were never meant to find. The weaponization of confusion. There is a strange kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from not knowing what's going on. A quiet that wraps itself around you when too many things are said at once, each one slightly off, slightly sharp, slightly wrong. And in that silence, you freeze. You stop moving, not because you've chosen to, but because your mind has nowhere solid left to place its feet. Confusion doesn't shout. It drips, slowly, constantly, until the ground becomes too slick for logic to stand. Did you understand what he meant back there? I think so. Or maybe I just didn't want to ask again. That kind of hesitation, that's the soft soil where manipulation takes root. When someone speaks in circles, floods you with jargon, flips their meaning like a coin, you begin to second-guess your own footing. You don't want to look slow. You don't want to seem ungrateful. You nod along, even as your inner compass spins. Sometimes it's emotional, too many feelings coming at once. A sudden apology wrapped in blame. A compliment that somehow feels like a command. Your heart flinches, not from impact, but from not knowing how to respond. Wait, are they mad at me or are they joking? I thought it was a joke too, but now I'm not sure anymore. In that gap between understanding and uncertainty, a soft kind of compliance grows. You follow not because you're convinced, but because you're lost, and lost people will cling to any voice that sounds confident. This is how confusion becomes a leash, not a yank, but a loop, tightened by the person who always seems to have the final word, no matter how unclear it is. Because when clarity vanishes, power doesn't disappear. It concentrates. There's a kind of manipulation that doesn't require lies, only too many truths, piled on top of each other, mismatched, misshaped, until nothing fits, but everything looks close enough. And you start to believe the fault is yours for not keeping up. I thought I got it, but then the next thing contradicted it. Yeah, and by the time I was ready to ask, the topic had already changed. It's not always grand. Sometimes it's just the fine print, a fast disclaimer, an answer that slips sideways when pressed. You try to push back, but there's nothing firm to push on. That's the real trick. Confusion isn't a wall, it's quicksand. It doesn't block you, it slows you. Just enough that someone else walks ahead, and suddenly you're following. But here, in this space, we do not rush to clarity. We let the fog settle. We breathe into the discomfort of not knowing, not to surrender, but to observe. And when you notice the confusion, you no longer live inside it. You name it. You step outside the spin, and you listen for the voice that doesn't rush, doesn't twist, doesn't flood. Sometimes, that voice is your own. Let the echoes quiet. Let the loops unwind. And now, gently, we turn inward. Because even memory, like a dream, can be rewritten. But not all at once. Only softly. Only slowly. Like the way a story changes when it's whispered under moonlight. The rewriting of memory. There's something unsettling about memory. We like to think of it as a dusty archive, a static shelf of facts we can retrieve at will. But in reality, memory is more like a foggy mirror. Each time we look into it, we wipe a new shape across the surface. What we recall isn't a replay, but a rewrite. It's known as the misinformation effect, and it's one of the softest, most silent manipulations of all. Imagine two friends reminiscing over coffee. Didn't we meet at that bookstore near campus? No. It was that late-night diner after the film screening, remember? Oh, right. The place with the neon jukebox. Neither of them questions the correction. The moment shifts. The past rearranges itself ever so slightly to fit the new suggestion. But what if it didn't happen that way? What if their minds, eager to agree, eager to connect, just quietly adopted a memory that never was? This is how the manipulation slips in, through shared stories, through leading questions, through the headlines we skim, the movies we rewatch, the tales we retell. A word here, a tone there, and suddenly, we're certain something happened that never did. Or we forget what once seemed unforgettable. And that's the danger. Because if our memories are this fragile, then so is our identity. If I can't trust my mind to hold the truth, how do I know who I am? Worse still, who might take advantage of that softness? Who profits when a population forgets the real cause of a war? When a person misremembers the kindness of an abuser? When a nation redrafts its past into something more palatable? In the stillness of night, when the world goes quiet and the mind begins to drift, this question echoes softly. What if your memories aren't yours at all? But don't linger too long in that uncertainty. The next current pulls you gently towards something even deeper, into the rhythms of repetition, where the truth starts to shimmer and blur. Truth by repetition. It starts like a whisper on a quiet evening train. You've heard the words before, maybe in passing, maybe from someone you trust. They didn't seem important at first, just background noise, but then they returned again and again, until they nestled quietly inside your thoughts, no longer questioned, just accepted. This is how repetition rewires truth. In psychology, it's called the illusory truth effect, but in your everyday life, it's far more subtle than science suggests. It's the song that plays softly in the back of your mind, not catchy enough to dance to, but just persistent enough to hum when you're not thinking. When something is said enough times, your mind doesn't need to believe it at first. It just needs to hear it. A soft voice speaks as the room dims. Have you noticed, one says gently, how even the silliest things sound wise when repeated often? The other chuckles, almost embarrassed. Like that time everyone kept saying, "You'll understand when you're older." And then one day, I did. Or at least I thought I did. You're not alone in that. The brain is wired to find comfort in familiarity. It assumes that what's familiar must also be right, must be safe. That's why even absurd ideas, repeated often, feel like common sense. It's not logic, it's rhythm. A lullaby that bypasses your skepticism and tucks itself under the covers of your identity. And here's the gentle warning. When belief becomes background music, whose playlist are you really listening to? But there's no blame here, only awareness. Because we all fall asleep to something. Maybe a memory, maybe a voice we trust, maybe a phrase we don't even remember choosing. And that's okay. The point is not to resist the rhythm, but to notice the beat. So tonight, as you lie in stillness, let your mind wander through the echo chambers of your own thoughts. Which ones are yours? Which ones just moved in when no one was watching? The window is open. The breeze carries a soft refrain from somewhere distant. It doesn't demand your attention. It only asks to be heard. Once, twice, 10 times. And with each repetition, the night grows softer. Let the next thought rise like a quiet wave. Because coming next is the frame, not of what you see, but how you see. Where the object stays the same, but the meaning bends with the light. The framing trap. It's strange, isn't it? How the truth never changes, but how we see it always does. the same facts, the same moment, the same glass of water, yet depending on the lens, it can seem like a blessing or a threat. This is the subtle power of framing, not changing reality, but the way it's wrapped. Like a photograph whose borders dictate its meaning, framing quietly influences our perception, not through force, but suggestion. The world doesn't need to lie to us outright. It only needs to present itself from a flattering angle. And the most dangerous part? We often don't even notice it's happening. Picture two friends standing in front of a painting. One says, "It's a masterpiece of courage." The other says, "It glorifies violence." Same image, two frames, one inspiring, one terrifying. Now imagine this happening every day, in news headlines, in job interviews, in conversations that start with, "Let me be honest." You're not being told what to think. You're being told how to think. The facts are the same, but the frame, the emphasis, the tone, the emotional wrapping guides your interpretation. Do you ever feel like the news is trying to scare you? Not always. Sometimes it just sounds selective. Exactly, not false, just framed. Framing isn't about truth or lies. It's about focus. When someone says, "You only got a 70, they're framing your result as failure. When someone says, "You passed," they're offering relief. Same score. But now, your emotional response has changed. Not because the data changed, but because the light hitting it did. Manipulators understand this instinctively. They won't tell you danger is good. They'll just call it necessary. They won't say you're losing. They'll say you're investing. They don't change the glass. They just tilt it in a way that makes it look full. And once your emotions are triggered, logic becomes secondary. You feel certain, even if you're being misled. This is why framing is so powerful. It bypasses your reason by flattering your fears or inflating your hopes. A poorly lit hallway suddenly feels like a trap. A well-lit lie suddenly feels like comfort. In the right frame, even isolation can look like independence. Even submission can look like loyalty. Have you ever trusted someone just because they seemed confident? Yeah, I didn't even question it until it was too late. Maybe it wasn't confidence. Maybe it was framing. So the next time something feels obvious, pause. Ask, is it true or just well framed? Because clarity doesn't come from what's inside the frame. It comes from stepping outside of it. Now let's soften the edges of certainty and drift toward the next illusion, the false consensus, the belief that everyone agrees when maybe no one really does. The false consensus illusion. A whisper floats in the mind late at night. Everyone else already agrees. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It just sits there, heavy and quiet, as if truth were measured by volume. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Not a reason, not a fact. Just the feeling that the room is already full, and that your silence would be safer than your doubt. You see, when the world feels uncertain, your brain reaches for safety in numbers. If it seems like everyone is nodding, you're more likely to nod too. Not because you understand, but because you don't want to be alone. That's the soft trap, the illusion of consensus. It tells you that you're part of something, that your beliefs are echoed, that you're not crazy. And manipulators? They know this. They know how easy it is to forge a crowd from smoke. A few fake comments, a few planted smiles, a few curated headlines. Suddenly, the echo becomes a chorus, and your doubt melts into the sound of belonging. Late in A man once overheard two strangers praising a product. No sales pitch, just casual talk. The next day, he bought it without question. Why? Not because he wanted it, but because it already felt approved, certified by silence. And sometimes it doesn't even take a conversation. It takes a gesture, a glance, a pause that feels rehearsed. Someone stepping forward before you, as if leading the way, when really, they were just pretending to know the path. The illusion doesn't ask for your belief. It nudges it, gently, like rain on a windshield until your view shifts without you realizing. "Do you think people really believe that?" she asked, folding laundry under a warm lamp. He looked up from his phone, hesitant. "I mean, they all posted it, so maybe. Or maybe no one wants to be the first to say otherwise. Because here's the truth hiding behind the consensus. Sometimes there is no crowd, just the echo of one voice bouncing off the walls, and your mind, craving confirmation, accepts the illusion without challenge. Like walking into a room and assuming everyone is already clapping for something you haven't even seen. The danger? You might trade your integrity for inclusion. You might abandon your questions just to avoid the loneliness of disagreement. And in doing so, you become part of the illusion yourself, a silent figure in a chorus that never truly sang. But what if you paused? What if you asked, who's really saying this? What if you looked for the faces behind the noise? And in that space between agreement and assumption, you'd find something sacred, your own thought, unshaped, unpushed, real. Because even if 1,000 voices say yes, it doesn't mean your no is wrong. It might just mean you're awake. Now, let's move gently onward into a shadow much older than illusion, into fear itself. The earliest voice, the ancient manipulator, and perhaps the hardest one to see through. The fear lever. It always begins with a whisper. Something feels wrong. A message blinks red. A voice tightens. A headline screams. Suddenly, you're alert. Heart rate rising. Breath shallow. Your body is preparing for battle, but your mind is not. Because fear, once awakened, doesn't ask questions. It commands. Fear sharpens the senses, yes, but in doing so, it narrows the mind. The moment it enters the room, complexity disappears. Options collapse. You stop evaluating and start reacting. And that is exactly where the manipulator wants you. He doesn't need to lie to you. He just needs you afraid. Afraid of being left out. Afraid of being too late. Afraid of being alone. In that state, you're easier to steer than you realize. He'll wrap fear in urgency. Act now. Limited time. Only one left. You'll regret it if you wait. These aren't just marketing tricks. They're psychological shortcuts to override deliberation. Because fear doesn't just freeze us. It funnels us. It points us in a single direction, away from thought and toward escape. It makes you look at the fire instead of the exits. And what's worse, it often masquerades as concern. "I'm just warning you," they say. "You need to do this for your own good." But whose good is it really? In a dark room, a flashlight shows you only one path. That's what fear does. It isolates a single option and frames it as salvation. But you weren't meant to live by reflex alone. You were made to reason, to reflect. Fear can warn, but it should not govern. Two people sit in a cafe. "Why'd you buy that?" she asks. "They said it was the last one, that I'd miss out." "But did you actually want it?" He hesitates, staring at the bag. "I don't know. I just didn't want to regret not acting." She smiles gently. "So you weren't buying, you were escaping." That's the danger of fear. When we're driven by it, we don't choose. we flee. And when we flee, someone else chooses for us. The direction of our steps no longer belongs to us. We've handed over the map to the one who lit the fire. So pause here. Ask yourself, if you're running, do you still know why? Or have you forgotten the question in your rush for answers? Let's breathe now. Let the pulse slow. Because the next illusion comes not from fear, but from false warmth, a helping hand that hurries, an embrace that pressures. Let's explore how urgency can wear the mask of kindness. The false emergency. Sometimes the loudest part of the mind is the one whispering, "Hurry." Not because there's a fire, but because someone wants you to think there is. That's how urgency works. Not as a signal, but as a signal hijacked. It tugs at your breath, sharpens your heartbeat, and pushes you to act before your reasoning arrives at the scene. You see it everywhere. A screen flashes red. Only 2 left. A voice tells you, now or never. But what if it's neither? What if limited time is just a leash on your better judgment? A soft voice stirs the calm. Do you ever wonder why everything suddenly feels like a crisis, even when nothing is actually wrong? His friend pauses, stirring their tea. It's like someone dimmed the light and turned up the pace, not because we're late, but because they need us to move faster than we can think. That's the trick. Create a false emergency, and people stop asking questions. The brain's defense systems reroute, not toward understanding, but escape. It becomes easier to say yes when we think saying no takes too long. It's easier to buy, to agree, to click, to comply. The moment feels like it will disappear if you don't grab it. But maybe that moment never truly existed. The illusion isn't in the offer, it's in the pressure, like a shadow cast by a candle, real, but only because of the angle. Picture this. You're at a small counter. The person in front of you steps aside, and suddenly the clerk looks up. "If you want the last one," they say softly, "it's now or never." And for some reason, even though you didn't plan to buy anything, your hand reaches forward. Why? Because the moment wasn't about the item. It was about you being cornered by time that wasn't yours. Urgency shrinks options. It shrinks thought. It shrinks you until you feel like you're solving a crisis, when really you're just reacting to one that was planted. And yet, it's such a human instinct to want to catch the train, to not miss the window. But if the decision can't wait until morning, maybe it isn't your decision anymore. Funny how silence gives things space. One voice says, the other smiles, and pressure takes it all away. So if your body tightens when the timer starts, take a breath, return to your own clock. Because rest, unlike urgency, is not a performance. You don't need to be fast to be right. You just need to be still enough to see through the fog. Now, let's walk toward the next strange doorway, one that wears contradiction like a cozy blanket. It's warm, it's odd, and it tells 2 truths at once. But which part are you listening to? Cognitive dissonance, dancing. In the quiet theater of the mind, there's a peculiar kind of tension that plays out behind closed curtains, an invisible tug-of-war between what we believe and what we do. This is cognitive dissonance. It isn't loud, it doesn't shout, but it simmers, deep and quiet, like heat beneath still water. And the moment we feel it, we ache for peace, for alignment, for someone, anyone, to whisper, "It's okay, you're not the problem." Imagine telling yourself you're honest. Then one day, you lie to protect someone. That feeling right after? That's dissonance, a splitting. Two opposing truths living inside one chest, and it feels wrong, not morally, but viscerally, like a violin tuned a half note off. That's when the dance begins. Manipulators understand this dance. They don't stop the music, they change the rhythm. Instead of letting you work through the dissonance yourself, they hand you a shortcut. You didn't lie, they might say. You protected someone. You were kind. Suddenly, the storm clears. Your discomfort dissolves, not through truth, but through convenience. But there's a price for that relief. Your compass. I feel bad about this. But maybe I'm overthinking it? A woman asks her friend, her eyes searching for an escape from the guilt. The friend leans in, smiling softly. You didn't do anything wrong. They deserved it, didn't they? And just like that, the tension is soothed. But not resolved, redirected. A new story forms, not from reflection, but from someone else's narrative. The real danger here is subtle. When someone helps you resolve your internal conflict, they aren't just offering peace. They might be reshaping your values. You begin to trust their framing of reality more than your own gut. Each time they solve your discomfort for you, your internal compass weakens, your boundaries blur, and your beliefs bend toward theirs. This is how values shift, not in grand speeches or violent debates, but in quiet moments of vulnerability, where a gentle voice replaces your own. And the scariest part? It feels like relief. A man once confessed, I knew it wasn't right, but she made it sound like I had no choice, that I was doing the mature thing. And perhaps that's the greatest manipulation of all, making us feel noble while we betray our own integrity. As we drift deeper into this exploration, a question lingers like fog on a dim lake. If someone else removes your inner conflict for you, are they also planting the belief that grows in its place? Now, let the mind quiet and follow me into the next shadowed space where clarity slips away and vagueness becomes a veil, a tool, a whisper that says less while shaping more. The Vagueness Cloak. You hear something, and it strikes a chord. You're the type of person who cares deeply, but doesn't always show it. Your breath stills for a second. That's you, isn't it? Or maybe everyone. There's a strange comfort in words that feel like they know you, but comfort can also be a trap wrapped in velvet. This is the Barnum effect, a quiet psychological spell. Vague statements that feel intimately tailored, yet are broad enough to apply to nearly anyone. You have a creative mind, but sometimes doubt your choices. You often feel like you were meant for more. Lines like these feel like open windows into your soul. But what if they're just mirrors held up to the sky? Two coworkers walk out of a meeting, both having just heard the same speech. One says, "That manager really gets me." The other shrugs, "Felt like a horoscope to me." And still, they both keep following the plan. That's the cloak. Vagueness doesn't offer clarity, it offers possibility. Not truth, but resonance. And resonance feels good. But when everyone feels seen by the same illusion, who's actually being seen? Even the most absurd predictions can feel real when sprinkled with personal hope. We hear what we need, and that need turns ordinary language into prophecy. Late at night, you scroll through messages looking for meaning. You've been through a lot, but strength lives in your silence. You pause. It's vague, yes, but still, it feels like someone noticed. The danger? When something speaks to everyone, it can guide anyone. And in the wrong hands, that guidance can become a tool. So here's a gentle truth. You're not difficult to read. You're human, and humans long to be known. But don't confuse feeling known with being understood. Let your thoughts drift now. Rest in the awareness that vagueness can soothe, but it can also sway. If you ever find yourself believing a phrase that fits too easily, ask yourself, did it describe me, or just echo my longing? Let's take a deeper breath together and move gently toward the next question. Why do we obey those who wear the mask of authority, even when our soul whispers, wait? The lab coat illusion. Under soft lighting and the quiet hush of a drifting mind, we reach a place where appearances begin to matter more than truth. Here lies the lab coat illusion, a subtle manipulation cloaked not in malice, but in credibility. In this space, authority doesn't need to earn trust. It only needs to wear the right outfit. Imagine this. A man walks into a room wearing a white coat. Instantly, the room hushes. No one asks, what does he know? They ask, what should I do? Without speaking a word, he commands attention. Why? Because the coat whispers something louder than facts. He must be right. This is how we're wired. Authority signals, like uniforms, badges, or even confident posture, short-circuit our skepticism. When someone looks like they know what they're doing, we stop analyzing what they're doing. It's not always a flaw. It's an evolutionary shortcut. In moments of uncertainty, humans look for leaders, but the trouble begins when those signals are counterfeit. You think he's actually a doctor? I mean, he had a clipboard, didn't he? So do waiters. That exchange, as lighthearted as it sounds, exposes a heavy truth. We often surrender our own judgment for the comfort of someone else's image, and manipulation loves comfort. Consider the famous Milgram experiments. Participants, believing they were helping in scientific research, administered what they thought were painful electric shocks to others. Why? Because someone in a lab coat told them to. No threats, no violence, just firm tone and the right costume. And so, the illusion worked. But what happens when the coat is just a prop? When the title is borrowed, the badge is plastic, the voice rehearsed. We may obey lies simply because they're delivered with authority's cadence. And in that obedience, the manipulator plants control, not through force, but through persuasion dressed in confidence. We don't question the instruction because we don't question the instructor. He seemed so sure. Did you even ask for his credentials? No, I didn't want to be rude. And there it is. The fear of confrontation, the social script that says doubting authority is impolite. Manipulators count on that. They don't need to shout. They don't need to beg. They only need to look official, sound convincing, and stay calm. If they get that right, your instincts will do the rest. But awareness is the antidote. When you start asking not just what is being said, but who is saying it and why, the illusion begins to fade. Authority should be earned, not performed. Trust should be built, not borrowed. And the truth, it rarely needs a costume. Let that settle in your thoughts like a feather landing on water. Now breathe with me as we gently drift into the next manipulation. A darker one, more personal, more destabilizing. One where reality itself is rewritten. The mirror that lies. There's a moment, quiet and almost invisible, when the mirror stops reflecting you and begins reflecting someone else's version of you. At first, it's just a correction. You forgot what day it was. You misremembered a detail. You laughed at something that apparently never happened. So you nod. Maybe you did get it wrong. After all, it's only human to forget, right? But the corrections continue. They chip away like water under stone, soft and patient. You begin to flinch at your own thoughts. You double-check your own feelings before you speak. And slowly, you begin to doubt the very voice that once anchored you to truth. In the world of gaslighting, reality isn't denied outright. It's rewritten like a slow-moving fog that blurs the edges of what once felt sharp and clear. It's not a slap. It's not a scream. It's a whisper that wraps around your memory and says, "That never happened. And if it did, you misunderstood it." Or worse, you made it up. Sometimes it shows up in the gentlest of tones. A partner's voice in the kitchen. "You're always so sensitive. I was only joking." And just like that, your discomfort is turned against you. Or a colleague's chuckle in the hallway. "I think you're remembering it wrong. But hey, that's okay. We all get things twisted." Even kindness can carry this trick, dressed in silk instead of thorns. Because gaslighting doesn't just break your trust in others, it breaks your trust in yourself. And when you no longer believe yourself, where do you go? There's a quiet ache that follows this erosion. It sounds like the pause before you answer a simple question, suddenly unsure of what you saw, what you heard, what you felt. That pause becomes a habit, then a reflex, then a cage. Did I really say that? Maybe I overreacted. Maybe it's just me. But it's not just you. It never was. You were simply handed a mirror and told to find yourself in a version that didn't exist. So tonight, as you lie here, let that mirror melt. Let your memory be your own. Even if some parts are cloudy or cracked, they still belong to you. No one else has the right to steal the shape of your past and sculpt it into something more convenient for them. You are not broken. You were just being bent. And now, we breathe. We breathe into the spaces where doubt once lived. Because next, we'll step into something softer, something that often comes wrapped in ribbons and smiles. But beneath the surface, the favor is rarely free. The favor trap. It often starts with something small, a warm smile, an offer to help carry a bag, a cup of coffee when you weren't expecting one. It feels like kindness, gentle, thoughtful, even comforting. And yet, beneath that soft gesture lies an invisible thread, the beginning of a silent pull that binds us to something unseen. In this quiet space between gratitude and guilt, the favor trap takes root. You see, the human heart is wired to reciprocate. When someone does something for us, even the tiniest gesture, our social instincts awaken. We want to return the kindness, not because we were told to, but because we feel it's the right thing to do. That sense of fairness is ancient. It predates currency, contracts, even laws. It's what helped early communities survive. But manipulators understand this primal reflex, and they use it. A small favor doesn't just earn goodwill. It creates an imbalance, one that nags quietly in your mind until you even the score. But here's the trick. The repayment isn't always equal. You might return a $100 favor for a $5 coffee. Not because you're foolish, but because your emotions, not your logic, are steering the ship. Now imagine this in slow motion. A gentle voice. "Hey, I helped you out last time, right?" And your memory nods before your brain does. "Yes, you did." "Then could you just..." And there it is, the ask. Larger, heavier, more complex. And yet it feels wrapped in silk, softened by the past. After all, how can you say no to someone who was kind to you? This is the quiet genius of the favor trap. It doesn't demand, it nudges. It doesn't scream, it whispers in the language of reciprocity. And before you realize it, your choices narrow. not by force, but by feeling. Now, let's imagine two strangers at a cafe. She asks softly, "He paid for my lunch yesterday? Do you think I owe him dinner?" Her friend replies, "Do you want to take him to dinner?" She pauses, looks away, then says what many of us feel but rarely voice, "I don't know anymore." This is where the trap springs, not with a bang, but with confusion. When obligation overrides desire, the favor has stopped being a gift. It becomes a transaction disguised in politeness. And in that moment, one question echoes like a lullaby dipped in suspicion. If every act of kindness comes with strings, are we still free to say no? Let that thought linger, just like the weight of a favor you never asked for. Now breathe. Let your mind drift. We're leaving behind the quiet snare of obligation and stepping into a world that feels softer still. A place where fiction becomes a mirror and stories become tools, where manipulation no longer wears favors, but fairy tales. Let's wander into the next realm, storytelling, where the truth hides in metaphor and the mind begins to dream. The story that steers you. There's something strangely quiet about the way a story enters the mind, not like a knock, not like a demand, but more like the scent of something familiar, drifting through an open window. You're not thinking critically when a story begins. You're listening, watching, feeling. And somewhere between the first scene and the second, your guard forgets why it was standing at all. You know how it feels. You've walked alongside a character, someone flawed, maybe funny, maybe heartbroken. Their struggle becomes yours. And just like that, the story isn't theirs anymore. It's gently wrapped around you. This is narrative transportation, a delicate trance where you suspend disbelief, not just in the plot, but in your own defenses. You stop analyzing, you absorb, not because you're weak, but because you're human. And in this space, ideas no longer need to knock. They walk in wearing someone else's shoes. Two strangers wait at a bus stop in the soft silence before sunrise. One of them says, "I used to think people were either good or bad. Then I met someone who lied to protect me." The other doesn't reply, just nods, almost without knowing why. When a message is delivered by a character you trust, the message itself inherits that trust. Manipulators know this. That's why they don't preach. They tell tales. They don't argue. They introduce you to someone you'd root for, and the lesson is tucked inside the folds of that person's journey, like a seed hidden in a sweet fruit. Have you ever walked out of a film feeling braver or more forgiving? And only hours later did you realize the character's decisions had softly echoed into your own. That's the quiet power of stories. They don't instruct. They invite. But sometimes, you're not just agreeing with a person in a story. You're agreeing with the author behind them, the one who built the stage, shaped the conflict, and chose the ending. And if you didn't know that message was there, who chose it for you? A small tale told well can steer entire lives. It can soften hard truths or decorate lies until they feel like virtues. And the next time you say, "This just feels right," ask, was that feeling yours? Or did it begin long ago, in the voice of a stranger, wrapped inside a fable you forgot you were still carrying? But don't worry if your thoughts blur as you drift. That's part of the process. Sleep is also a kind of story, one where your mind wanders without resistance, rewriting the world with every breath. And now, as your body finds stillness, we move to something even more delicate, the strange comfort of agreement. Why sometimes it feels safer than thinking. The nod effect. It starts with something small, a glance, a subtle nod, a quiet moment when someone agrees with you, not with words, but with a slight tilt of the head, a relaxed smile, the kind of body language that whispers, "Yes, we're on the same page." It feels warm, reassuring. We're wired for this. From infancy, we search for those cues, mirrored expressions, mutual movement, shared understanding. Harmony feels like safety, but harmony can be manipulated. That simple nod, so innocent, so human, can be a tool of control. When someone repeatedly nods as they speak to you, they're not just expressing agreement. They're setting a rhythm, a cue for your subconscious to mirror back. Without even noticing, your head might start to move with theirs. Agreement, then, begins in the body before it ever reaches the mind, and manipulators know it. Wait, have you ever noticed how you sometimes nod just because someone else is nodding at you? Yeah, I thought it was just a polite thing, like, it keeps things smooth. Exactly. But what if that smoothness isn't neutral? What if it's steering you? It's in meetings where a leader nods as they suggest an idea, priming everyone to fall in line. It's in conversations where someone uses small gestures of validation, gentle nods, affirming eye contact, not to listen, but to lure agreement. You start to feel that pushing back would disturb the flow, rupture the mutual rhythm you've unknowingly entered. So instead, you nod too. You comply. But here's the quiet question. If you agreed just to keep the peace, was it ever real agreement? The truth is, our desire to avoid conflict often outweighs our need for accuracy. In those delicate seconds, we sacrifice clarity for cohesion. The nod becomes not a sign of understanding, but a signal of surrender. You may not even realize you've been guided. That's what makes this manipulation so soft, so elegant. It doesn't shout, it doesn't force, it invites. And the invitation often feels good. That's the danger. By the time you realize you've agreed to something you weren't entirely sure about, the moment has passed. The conversation has moved on. Your nod has become part of the narrative. You agreed, they'll say. And in a way, you did. Just not with full awareness. Not with your whole self. This is the subtle power of the nod effect. It plays on our deep-rooted need for connection, for rapport, for rhythm. But in skilled hands, that rhythm can become a leash. And sometimes, the person leading the dance never had your best interest in mind. So next time you feel your head moving along with someone else's, pause. Ask yourself, am I agreeing because I believe this? Or because it feels easier than disrupting the flow? Because that's the real manipulation, not of your mind, but of your harmony. And next, we step into the illusion of consensus, where the crowd doesn't just follow, they perform. The manufactured crowd. There's a strange comfort in the sound of applause, even when we're not the one being applauded. It carries a rhythm that tells the brain, this is safe, this is right, this is good. And so often, we join in, not out of belief, but because not clapping feels like dissonance, like being the lone ripple in a still lake. But what if that applause was never real? A man once walked into a room full of strangers. He wasn't sure if he was early, but everyone was already nodding along to something projected on the wall. He took a seat, unsure of what he had missed. One person leaned over and whispered, "This one's been shared thousands of times." He nodded back, more to blend in than to understand. That nod? That's where the manipulation began. We are social creatures, tuned like violins to the vibrations of those around us, and the digital age plays that note on repeat, a post with 2,000 hearts, a comment section that reads like a chorus, a trending topic that feels like the voice of the people. But behind the curtain, sometimes, it's wires, algorithms, and silent puppeteers pulling at human instinct. You've seen it before. A product suddenly appearing on every corner of your feed. A song you've never heard that feels familiar because the numbers say everyone's listening. Even a cause, a movement that swells with momentum, but started with planted voices, artificial seeds. The illusion isn't in the message, it's in the mass. And yet, how easy it is to follow. Because standing still when the crowd moves feels like defiance, like loneliness in disguise. Do you really believe this? Someone might ask at a gathering. Well, comes the answer, I saw it was trending, and everyone seems on board. But are they? What if the crowd was never there? What if the noise was just an echo chamber with clever acoustics? Would we have clapped just as loudly? Would we have shared, liked, reposted, nodded in rhythm if we knew the rhythm was pre-programmed? These are not accusations. They are questions tucked in soft linen. You are not wrong for trusting what looks popular. That instinct kept our ancestors alive. Belonging once meant survival. But in a world of simulated consensus, maybe the truest act of awareness is to ask, who's really clapping and why? So let yourself breathe. Let your thoughts settle like dust in a still room. Because next, we drift into quieter territory, where doubt isn't disruption, but design, where uncertainty becomes the whisper behind the curtain. Let it be gentle. Let it carry you. The implanted doubt. It doesn't take a loud voice to shake your foundation. Sometimes, all it takes is a whisper, a quiet question, released like smoke into a still room. You don't even notice it at first. You continue with your thoughts, with your story, with your version of truth. But the whisper lingers. It curls around your certainty, softening the edges of what you once knew. That's the power of implanted doubt. It doesn't argue. It doesn't shout. It simply asks, "Are you sure?" This kind of manipulation is rarely aggressive. It works better when it's gentle, when it lets you dismantle your own certainty. All it needs to do is tilt your perception slightly off balance. It doesn't aim to replace your belief, not right away. It simply loosens it, like a thread pulled from a tightly woven sweater. The unraveling comes later, often without the manipulator having to say much more. Do you really think she meant it that way? I'm not saying it's wrong, but what if there's more to the story? These aren't commands. They're permissions. Permission to doubt what you know, to question what felt solid, to peer into the cracks that weren't there before. The voice that implants doubt often seems reasonable, polite, maybe even caring. It pretends to be on your side. That's why it works. When you begin to question your memory, your instinct, your belief, something deep shifts. Your internal compass spins a little, not enough to notice at first, but enough to make you hesitate. That moment of hesitation is all it takes, because now you're not sure if your instincts are reliable. You start seeking confirmation from outside yourself, and the more you look outward, the further you drift from your own anchor. Two friends sit in a quiet kitchen. "You told me he lied," one says, uncertain. "I thought he did," the other replies, staring into her coffee. "But now, I don't know. Maybe I overreacted." It wasn't a lie that changed her mind. It wasn't truth either. It was a doubt, a carefully placed seed, planted when someone asked, "But has he ever done that before?" Sometimes, it isn't about making you believe something new. It's about making you question what you already believed. And in that fog, the manipulator doesn't need to lead you. They just let you drift. Because a drifting mind is far easier to steer. And the real danger? You'll never remember the exact moment it began. The moment your certainty started to dissolve. That's the trick with implanted doubt. It doesn't announce itself. It hides in the spaces between your thoughts, in the hesitation before you speak, in the pause before you act. So the next time your beliefs feel soft, your confidence strangely quiet, ask yourself this: was this my thought, or a question someone wanted me to carry? Let's sit quietly now and slip into the next idea, where confusion wears the robes of wisdom and complexity becomes the perfect hiding place for control. The intellectual bluff. You've heard it before. The kind of speech that fills a room with sound but says almost nothing. It's dressed in polished words, layered with qualifiers and academic tones, until what was once a simple idea now feels like a locked box without a key. And the moment you feel that flicker of confusion, something curious happens. You begin to lean in, not to understand, but to submit. One voice in a dim cafe pauses mid-sip. "Is it just me?" she asks. "Or did he say absolutely nothing for 20 minutes?" Her friend shrugs, eyes still on the screen. "Maybe we're just not smart enough to get it." That's the twist, isn't it? The more tangled the message, the more brilliant the messenger appears. It's a strange exchange. Simplicity is mistaken for weakness. Complexity becomes camouflage. And when we can't find the meaning, we assume it must be too deep for us to grasp. But real wisdom rarely hides behind riddles. It doesn't need a pedestal of jargon to stand tall. It's often found in the smallest, clearest truths, spoken with the ease of someone who doesn't need to impress. In psychological terms, this is cognitive overload. The brain flooded with too much abstract input, short circuits, and in that mental fog we begin to defer. We nod, we agree, not because we understand, but because we want to seem like we do. It's a quiet surrender, one that sounds like, "Wow, that was deep," even when it wasn't. A man in a hallway once said with confidence, "If you can't explain it to a child, you don't understand it yourself." And it stayed with her, not because it was clever, but because it was clear. Clarity is power, and yet some learn to weaponize its absence. They confuse to control, they impress to suppress, and the more we struggle to keep up, the more we look to them for direction. But tonight, you don't have to follow that trail of complicated echoes. Let your mind settle. Let those heavy words drift away, like a fog lifting from a quiet field at dawn. Even now, if someone speaks and the meaning evades you, pause. Don't blame yourself. Don't chase clarity that was never offered. Just ask, does complexity make them right? Or just harder to question? As you breathe a little slower, let this idea slip into sleep beside you. Truth is often soft-spoken. It doesn't wear armor. It doesn't hide in a maze. And now, we move into a deeper chamber of the self, where guilt waits in the corner like a loyal dog, its leash quietly tugging at your choices. Guilt as a compass. In the dim corridors of our minds, guilt often stands like a flickering lantern, casting light not only on what we've done wrong, but on what we think we should do next. It's supposed to be a compass, pointing us back to our values, keeping us aligned with integrity. But what happens when that compass no longer belongs to us? What if someone else is holding it, gently turning the needle toward their own destination? That's the danger of guilt when it's manipulated, not felt, but planted. It doesn't shout. It sighs. It doesn't command. It hesitates. Sometimes it doesn't say anything at all. A quiet glance, a disappointed breath, a silence long enough to feel like punishment. And just like that, you pivot. You change your mind, not because you want to, but because you can't bear the idea of being the bad one. Did I do something wrong? I never said that. But the way you looked at me, I was just surprised, that's all. And in that quiet misalignment, guilt blooms, not from truth, but from suggestion. You see, guilt tripping is never direct. That's its brilliance. It hides behind gestures and pauses, letting you fill in the blanks. And the moment you do, you've already taken on the weight. The manipulator doesn't even have to ask for what they want. You offer it, just to relieve the discomfort, just to make things right. But whose right are we trying to restore? A daughter skips a family event to attend an important job interview. Her father doesn't argue. He simply says, "Well, I suppose we'll make do without you." It won't be the same, of course. She stays home. The guilt wins. Or consider a friend who always jokes about how you've changed since your promotion. Not everyone forgets where they came from, you know. You laugh. You buy them dinner. You shrink, just a little. The manipulator didn't need to accuse. They only needed to cast the shadow. And your conscience, trained to self-correct, did the rest. This kind of guilt doesn't guide us back to our own values. It pulls us away from them. It steers us not toward truth, but toward compliance, toward appeasement. And we follow, believing we are kind, noble, moral, never realizing we're being led. So here's the haunting question. When your decisions are shaped by guilt, planted by someone else, who is really in control? Who gets to hold the compass? Is it still you? Or have you become a passenger, navigating someone else's emotional terrain while calling it your own? Take a breath. Let that question echo for a moment. Guilt is not the enemy, but when used as a leash, it ceases to be a guide and becomes a cage. And now, gently, we turn to something softer, just as invisible, just as powerful. Emotional mirroring, the next quiet trick of the mind, where someone becomes your reflection and then changes what you see. Emotional echoes. There's something ancient about the comfort we feel when someone reflects our emotion. It doesn't require explanation. Just a nod, a quiet tear in sync with yours, a chuckle at the exact moment your heart needed it. Suddenly, you're not alone. The world, for a breath, feels soft, like someone finally understands. But there's a difference between understanding and echoing, and the mind, when tired or tender, can't always tell them apart. Have you ever noticed how he always reacts exactly the way I feel? One voice might say softly in a cafe, stirring sugar into tea. Her friend leans in. "Yeah, but isn't that a good thing?" She pauses, blinking slowly. It is, unless it's just strategy. Emotional mirroring is among the most subtle techniques of psychological influence, because it doesn't push, it flows. It joins your current, gently, until you forget where it began. When someone mirrors your laughter, matches your silence, or echoes your sadness with just the right sigh, it awakens a quiet trust, a feeling that says, "We're the same." But if trust is built on reflection, what happens when the mirror was only a performance? It's easy to believe in connection when emotion is shared, but skilled manipulators use that same mirror not to bond, but to blend. They adopt your rhythm like a dancer falling into step. They weep not from pain, but to be invited deeper into yours. They smile, not because something is funny, but because they know that laughter shared is loyalty earned. The trick lies in timing. Not too soon, not too delayed. A tear just after yours. a nod just before your doubt. It doesn't have to be perfect, just familiar enough to feel safe. You may find yourself telling them things you didn't intend, confiding, explaining, trusting. And in the warmth of that trust, decisions are made, sometimes gently steered by someone whose feelings were never real. Last week, she cried when I told her about my dad, a man says, lying back in a half-lit room, eyes flickering toward the ceiling. But then what? His friend asks. She blocked me the next morning, said I was too intense. Echoes don't always mean presence. Sometimes they're playback, and that's the danger when emotion becomes theater. Still, the idea of someone understanding us so deeply is seductive. Who doesn't long to feel seen? But emotional safety requires more than matching feelings. It needs consistency, integrity, the kind of quiet honesty that doesn't shift when the spotlight fades. Ask yourself, gently, do they feel this too? Or are they just reflecting me? Because if your joy, your pain, your vulnerability is being mirrored back, whose reflection are you truly trusting? Now, let the thought drift like a ripple on still water, and as the surface calms, let's move together toward the next form of performance, one that doesn't echo emotion, but plays with it. Vulnerability as disguise. Performing weakness. Sometimes the softest voice doesn't whisper for help, it whispers control. We are drawn to weakness, taught to cradle it, to nurture it, to believe that those who appear hurt must need healing. And so we open our arms, we make room. We carry what we think is too heavy for someone else. But not all weakness is real. Some is performed. A trembling voice, a slow blink, a story of abandonment that drips with just enough pain to make you lean in. Not too much, just enough. This is not vulnerability, it's a role. A performance so convincing, it bypasses logic and awakens instinct. The caregiver inside you stretches out before the thinker can catch up. She said she had no one person says. And I believed him because, who lies about being broken? The other replies, but people do. Because in appearing powerless, they gain a subtle power. They don't need to demand. They don't need to force. They only need to appear in need, and they will be protected, prioritized, sometimes even obeyed. You begin to justify their behavior, make excuses on their behalf. You don't just protect them, you protect their illusion. And here's where it slips deeper. Once you're cast in the role of rescuer, you are no longer just yourself. You become part of the story they're writing. One where your job is to lift, to save, to stay. And leaving? That becomes betrayal. You might say, but they needed me. And someone wiser might ask, did they? Or did they just need you to feel needed? The moment someone uses their perceived fragility as leverage, not for healing, but for influence, they are not seeking care. They are guiding you, gently, into a trap built of guilt and self-assigned duty. And once you're inside, you may find yourself bending in directions you never intended. But pause. Ask yourself, are they truly broken? Or are they bending you to fit their shape? Sometimes the deepest manipulation isn't loud. It doesn't shout or demand. It trembles, it weeps, it withdraws, just enough to make you move closer. And so, we breathe, and we begin to see. Because next comes something even quieter, something that feels like curiosity, but hides the strings of control underneath. Let's drift there, softly, into the subtle power of asking the right questions. The question trap. A question can arrive like a soft knock on your thoughts. Not a demand, not a command, just an open door with a smile behind it. And yet, somehow, when you walk through it, you find yourself somewhere you didn't plan to be. The trap doesn't shout, it purrs. Don't you think she's being a little dramatic? You don't really believe that, do you? Isn't it obvious what they're really after? It feels like an invitation to explore, but the path is already chosen for you. Two friends sitting on a park bench. One leans back, squinting at the horizon, and asks, "Do you ever wonder why everyone likes him so much?" The other replies, "I didn't until now." That's how it works. The seed is planted, not a statement, but a shape of doubt, a shift in angle, just enough to nudge perception. Questions can be crafted like arrows dipped in honey. They sweeten the sting. They bypass defense. No confrontation, just the gentle feeling that you arrived at your own conclusion, even when that conclusion was never yours to begin with. Sometimes at work, someone says, "Don't you think that's a bit risky?" And you pause mid-action, not because they stopped you, but because the question suggested something you hadn't questioned before. You begin to rewind your logic, unsure if you missed something, even if you haven't. You might start defending yourself, not even realizing you're already on trial. That's the trap. A question doesn't force, it invites. But the room it invites you into may have only one chair. We trust curiosity. It feels innocent, pure, and in many forms, it is. But when curiosity is tailored, when it's used not to understand but to influence, then it becomes a kind of camouflage. You feel free, yet your freedom is rehearsed. You don't notice the leash when you're walking the direction they want you to go. Even the questions we ask ourselves can trap us. Why can't I ever get it right? What if I fail again? What's wrong with me? Those aren't reflections. They're accusations dressed in mirrors. The answers we give only deepen the illusion that we're choosing. But are we? What if the question itself has already chosen the answer? Later, as you lie still, eyes closed, breathing soft, you may remember conversations where your words didn't feel fully your own, where your agreement came not from clarity, but from comfort, where the shape of your belief was molded not by force, but by suggestion. And you may wonder, if I were asked something else that day, would I have become someone else? Sleep isn't just rest. It's a return to self, a place untouched by persuasion. So if your thoughts tonight feel scattered, gently follow them back, not to the answers, but to the questions that gave them form. Because maybe the story you tell yourself wasn't written by your pen. Maybe it began when someone handed you a question, and you didn't know it was a script. Now rest and breathe. In the next segment, we'll explore how memories of the past are sometimes placed to change your future. Planted memories. There are moments in life when a memory feels too real to doubt. The crack of laughter echoing down a hallway, the texture of a sweater someone once wore, or the scent of rain on a particular night. But what if those moments never happened at all? What if they were planted, gently, repeatedly, until fiction felt indistinguishable from memory? This is the unsettling truth behind memory implantation. A whisper here, a nudge there, a question phrased just so, "Don't you remember?" followed by a pause long enough for uncertainty to slip in. Whether in the hands of skilled interrogators or subtle manipulators, memory becomes pliable, like clay, molded not by truth, but by suggestion. You always hated that place, didn't you? No, I liked it. Wait, did I? Even simple implications can warp what once felt certain. It doesn't take hypnotic trances or elaborate deceptions, just repetition, and a tone of confidence. You told me that already. Are you sure that's how it went? You remember what happened next, don't you? These aren't commands, they're invitations to rewrite your own past. You don't have to accept them, but the brain craves coherence. If a narrative feels smoother with that false detail included, it will often welcome it. And with each retelling, that tiny fiction takes root, grows branches, and becomes indistinguishable from the real. Late one night, two friends sit on a balcony, sipping tea. "Hey, do you remember that time in college when we skipped class and drove to the coast?" "We never did that." "Yes, we did. You wore that yellow hoodie, and we stopped at that little diner with the jukebox." "No. I mean, wait, that does sound familiar." But it never happened. The memory was a gift, a fabrication wrapped in nostalgia and presented with confidence. And because the details were vivid enough and the story plausible enough, it began to glow like truth. The mind accepted it, stitched it into the tapestry of the past, and never questioned the seam. This is the soft danger of planted memories, not because they feel wrong, but because they don't. The fiction blends with the truth so seamlessly, we don't even notice the intrusion. And the consequence? We begin to lose authorship of our own story. A part of us no longer knows where we end and they begin. What was once a private archive becomes a collaborative diary, edited quietly in the margins by someone else. So if your memory can be edited, who's the author of your past? Let's now drift into the present moment, where memory isn't the battleground anymore, but attention is. A new form of control begins, not by altering what you remember, but by deciding what you notice. The spotlight effect. It begins with a quiet shift, barely noticed but deeply felt. One moment, your thoughts drift freely. The next, they're captured, tethered to something oddly specific. A misstep you made in conversation, a glance that lingered too long, a word you wish you'd said differently. Suddenly, your whole world feels like it's glowing under a beam of light, and you're standing center stage. The audience? Invisible. But their imagined eyes feel very real. This is the spotlight effect, and not just the one we place on ourselves, but the one placed upon us by others. Sometimes, manipulation isn't loud or commanding. It's subtle, like someone turning your head without touching you. A single comment can redirect your focus. A sigh at the wrong moment, a raised eyebrow, a pointed silence that makes you double-check your choices. And once your attention has been captured, it narrows. Like a flashlight in the dark, it only shows you what they want you to see. Did I say something wrong? No. It's just interesting how you chose to say it that way. Such exchanges don't accuse, they shift. Suddenly, you're defending your tone rather than your point. When someone exaggerates a tiny flaw or frames a neutral event as significant, they're not just making a scene, they're stealing your stage. You stop watching the whole play. You stare at the one actor they've spotlighted, and the real story fades into the shadows. In relationships, this can look like always circling back to your mistakes. In meetings, it's the focus on a single typo rather than the meaning behind the message. In everyday life, it might be someone questioning your timing, your mood, your posture, until you begin questioning it yourself. And the more this happens, the more you start doing their job for them. Your internal spotlight becomes externalized. You self-censor, you self-monitor. You hesitate before speaking, not out of care, but caution. What's dangerous isn't the beam of attention. It's the narrowing of awareness. Because when your gaze is fixed, you stop seeing what's around it. You don't notice the context. You don't question the motive. And you certainly don't see who's standing just behind the curtain. pulling the strings. There's a quiet irony here. The more self-aware you become under that beam, the less aware you are of how it got turned on you. And in that fog of attention, truth gets misfiled. You forget what actually happened. You remember how it made you feel. Two friends walk out of a gathering. One's distracted, the other notices. "You okay?" "I just kept thinking everyone noticed when I tripped. I don't even think they saw it." That gap between perception and reality, that's where the spotlight lives. So what happens when someone learns to use it on purpose? When they frame your every step in emotional neon, not to help you grow, but to keep you from looking elsewhere? If someone decides what you notice, don't they also decide what you forget? Let your focus soften now. Let the light widen. Not every detail needs your full attention. Not every glance is a message. Not every moment is a mirror. And as your awareness relaxes, we gently move into the next space, where the mind craves one quiet comfort: to be consistent with who we were yesterday, even when that keeps us exactly where someone wants us. Consistency chains. There's something oddly binding about the sound of your own voice, especially when it speaks in certainty. The moment you say something out loud, a quiet force begins to pull you toward it. It's not just memory, it's identity hardening. What was once a casual opinion becomes a cornerstone of how we see ourselves, how others expect us to behave. Like invisible thread, our past declarations begin to stitch together a version of us that we feel compelled to wear, regardless of whether it still fits. Do you still believe what you said last year? I mean, I said it, so I guess I do. Even if you've changed? I don't know. I don't want to sound fake. That's commitment bias gently whispering. It tells us that to be consistent is to be trustworthy, rational, good. But manipulators hear that whisper too, and they know how to turn up the volume. Often, all they need is for you to speak. Just a small public commitment, a belief shared in conversation, a preference voiced in passing. The moment it's spoken, it lives outside you, and now you feel responsible for maintaining it. That's where the chain begins, from a statement to a stance, from a stance to an action, from an action to a pattern. Suddenly, the shape of your behavior is sculpted not by who you are right now, but by who you once tried to sound like. This can happen in relationships too. A partner might nudge you early on to say, "I'd never leave you," or "This is the happiest I've ever been." Later, those words return, not to comfort, but to constrain. "But you said this was forever. You said you were happy?" And so you stay. Not because you still feel that way, but because you once said you did. It even happens in group settings. You tell a crowd your opinion. Now, to change it feels like betrayal, not just of them, but of yourself. You start to confuse loyalty with logic. A manipulator may ask you loaded questions early, ones that seem harmless but later become leverage. So, you support this, right? You're the kind of person who always does the right thing? And once you nod, the chain wraps tighter. Each decision that follows is no longer a choice. It's maintenance of a mask. Why did you agree to do that again? Because I said I would. I'm not the kind of person who backs out. But what if it's not right for you anymore? I'd rather be wrong than inconsistent. That quiet sentence reveals the cost. Inconsistency isn't weakness, it's often growth. But when you're tied to your past words, you're not evolving, you're just echoing. So tonight, as you lie in bed and the noise of the day dissolves, ask yourself, Are your actions really born from this moment? Or are you still acting out a sentence you once said to please someone else? Maybe it's time to loosen the chain, to allow yourself to change without guilt, to know that the truest version of you isn't carved in old statements, but whispered in your willingness to grow. And now, let us drift softly into something even more delicate, the language we use, and how it quietly rearranges our world. Words that mold reality. Somewhere in the quiet folds of language, reality begins to bend, not with a loud snap, but with a whisper, a turn of phrase, a sentence that paints the sky a different color. Words, after all, do more than point to truth. They frame it, soften it, sharpen it, tint it. They don't just describe our world, they give it shape. They tell us where to look, and sometimes where not to. Did he say survivor or victim? One voice asks, absent-mindedly flipping through a newspaper in the break room. Survivor sounds stronger, doesn't it? The other replies. And just like that, a story shifts, not in fact, but in feeling. Language is a lens, not a mirror. It doesn't just reflect, it refracts. That's how freedom fighter can stir admiration, while rebel evokes suspicion. How preemptive action can sound noble, while unprovoked attack tightens the chest. Even in the gentlest tones, language can be a velvet rope that guides you into someone else's version of the world. The power lies not in the words alone, but in the way they settle beneath awareness. A patient isn't terminal, they're bravely battling. A company doesn't fire employees, it undergoes structural optimization. And so we walk through life wearing borrowed lenses, seeing reality filtered through convenience, control, or comfort. In this space between the word and the thing it names, we are softened, persuaded, shaped. I didn't lie, someone says, fingers tightening around a lukewarm cup. I just didn't tell everything. You mean you framed it? Exactly. It sounded better that way. It's not manipulation if it feels normal. If it happens often enough, we begin to do it ourselves, choosing euphemism over clarity, metaphor over honesty. Not because we intend to deceive, but because we were taught to decorate the truth so it fits better in the room. And here's where it gets delicate. If someone else picks the labels you use, if they train your tongue to call restraint discipline or hesitation loyalty, they are not just influencing your speech, they're writing your story, replacing your inner narrator, recoloring your memories with gentler brushes. Words become walls or wings. Even in the most mundane moments, this shaping happens quietly. A neighbor remarks, "You're so responsible with your time," and suddenly staying home doesn't feel like isolation. It feels like wisdom. A coworker calls your complaint constructive feedback, and you speak more openly next time. Or less. So before you fall asleep tonight, here's a soft reflection to rest with. When you describe your life to yourself, whose language are you using? Was it handed to you, or did you choose it? Because if your words shape your world, then every sentence is a spell, every phrase a frame, every whisper a sculptor's hand. And now, let the words grow quieter. We're nearing a place where language thins and only the voice inside remains. But listen closely. It may not have started as yours. Let's follow it gently into the next thought. The inner critic inherited. That quiet voice inside you, the one that whispers, "You're not good enough," or sighs, "Why even try?" Did it really begin with you? Or was it planted there, like an old song stuck on repeat, composed by someone else and forgotten in origin? So many of us walk through life haunted by a critic we assume is our own. But if you listen closely, its tone carries the residue of someone else's disappointment. A parent's raised eyebrow, a teacher's cold correction, a lover's sudden silence. At first, we only hear them. But then, something shifts. Their words start to echo inside us, uninvited but persistent. And over time, those echoes become indistinguishable from our own voice. "Why do I always mess things up?" a man murmurs to himself as he fumbles with keys in the rain. His friend looks at him, puzzled. "Do you actually believe that?" He shrugs. "I guess so. My dad used to say that a lot when I was a kid." There it is. A belief disguised as self-awareness, but rooted in someone else's judgment. The inner critic is a master of disguise. It doesn't shout. It murmurs with authority. It borrows the rhythm of your own voice. It hides in the cadence of familiar thoughts. It uses the language you were raised in, and it cloaks itself in your past so completely that you rarely stop to ask, who is really speaking right now? But once you do pause, once you dare to question that voice, you begin to notice how unnatural it feels. It doesn't encourage growth. It stunts it. It doesn't challenge you lovingly. It belittles and punishes. It's not your wisdom speaking. It's your history echoing back. And here lies the danger. If you forget that the critic is inherited, you'll keep obeying it. You'll shrink your dreams to fit someone else's fears. You'll silence your creativity to avoid someone else's imaginary judgment. You'll mistake caution for conscience and doubt for humility. In soft hours of the night, when your guard is down and the mind floats between thoughts, that critic might return. It might say, "Don't try that. You'll fail." But tonight, you might respond differently, not with resistance, but with curiosity. Whose voice is that, really? Let that question hang in the air like incense. Let it soften the grip of the critic. Let it remind you that thoughts are not facts, that belief is not always truth, that memory is not always loyalty. You are not the one who wrote every line in your mental script, but you can be the editor. And as we drift deeper into stillness, we approach a strange twist in the mind's theater. If criticism can be inherited, then so can praise. But praise, too, is a double-edged whisper. Let's ease into that next, where compliments can control more than corrections, where approval becomes a leash, where applause isn't always encouragement, but sometimes manipulation in disguise. The praise prison. It starts softly, like a breeze that smells like love. "You did such a good job. This is the version of you I like." A warmth moves through your chest, your shoulders drop, but something inside, almost too small to notice, tightens, because praise is not always a gift. Sometimes it's a blueprint. You didn't ask for applause, but now you crave it. You didn't build a stage, but you find yourself standing on one. And every smile, every approving nod, begins to teach you who you should be, according to someone else's script. A woman once told her brother, "You're such a good listener. I wish Dad could see how you've matured." He didn't realize, until later, that those words became a kind of leash. He stayed quiet, even when he had something to say, afraid to lose that label, afraid to become unworthy of that rare nod of approval. Conditional praise is different from love. It doesn't hold you. It holds you back. At first, it feels like sunlight, but over time, it bends the branches of your choices until they grow in one direction only, toward the claps, toward the likes, toward the people who never stop watching. And sometimes they don't even mean harm. They just want you to be your best self. But what if their version of your best self is only the parts that serve them? A quiet conversation floats in the air of a coffee shop. "You're always so calm," says one voice. "I'm not always calm," the other replies after a pause. "I just learned that being calm keeps people happy with me." And in that silence, truth stretches its arms and wakes up. The real trap is not the praise, it's the performance that follows. You smile wider when they're looking. You shrink quieter when they frown. And eventually, the applause isn't a celebration, it's a condition. And you become an actor, forgetting where the stage ends. So ask yourself, not with judgment, just with curiosity, are you living your truth? Or just doing encore after encore, hoping for the same round of applause? You don't need to break the cage all at once. Just notice the velvet bars. Notice how soft they feel, how kind they sound, and how still they keep you in place. Now breathe. You're not alone. Let the sound of your breath remind you that you are not a performance. You are not a role. You are not a moment that needs to be clapped for. You are a river with no audience, and you're still real. Even when no one says, "Good job," the next whisper will follow wears a softer mask still, one that smiles, agrees, and hides the storm underneath. Let's drift gently now into the illusion of peace. Passive aggression. The peace that punishes. There is a silence that doesn't soothe. It stings. Not because it's loud, but because it's cold. In this kind of silence, you don't hear words. You feel distance. The kind that creeps in slowly and then suddenly feels like a wall. It's the quiet that doesn't come from calm, but from control. Passive aggression is often dressed as stillness. No yelling, no accusations, no conflict. Just a slow retreat, a closed door, a breath that pauses when you enter the room, a text that never gets sent, a gaze that skips past you like your furniture. And while there's no direct blow, the pain is undeniable, because the punishment is absence, and absence can be louder than any scream. It's the ache of not knowing. You lie awake wondering, what did I say? Was it that one moment at dinner? That comment I made 3 days ago? You play it back again and again, hoping to unlock the code that will bring the warmth back. But the rules are never spoken out loud. That's the trick. You can't fix what you're not allowed to name. The goal isn't resolution, it's power. This is where passive-aggressive manipulation becomes most effective. By withholding affection, attention, or validation, the manipulator forces you into a position of desperation. Not because you want control, but because you want connection. You begin to earn what should be freely given. You apologize first. You soften your tone. You step more lightly around the room. Not because you're wrong, but because you want to stop feeling invisible. Two friends sit on a bench, dusk settling around them like a heavy coat. Why hasn't she texted me back? Maybe she's just busy? She read it though. She always replies instantly. This feels different. Did you guys argue? Number, that's the thing. It's just quiet, but cold. That's worse sometimes, huh? Yeah, because it makes me feel like I'm the one who has to fix something I don't understand. Silence becomes the fog where guilt grows. The victim begins to self-edit, self-correct, self-blame. But relationships should be about clarity, not confusion. If love becomes a guessing game, something is broken. If emotional presence is a prize you have to win back, then affection has become currency. And that's not love. That's negotiation. So ask yourself, is this peace or punishment? Let's now move closer to the flame, where charm glows warmly on the surface, and beneath it are strings waiting to pull. The glow of charm. There's a certain kind of warmth that doesn't touch the skin. It hovers just above it, close enough to feel, far enough to remain untouched. This is the glow of charm. It enters a room like a soft breeze carrying laughter, brushing past your instincts before they have time to ask questions. It isn't intimacy. It's strategy dressed in a smile. Charm, when it's pure, feels like sitting by a fire you helped build. But when it's used as a tool, it's more like a fireplace that only lights up when you're watching. It draws you in, offers comfort, but only on its terms. You begin to trust without history, to feel known without being seen. And somewhere in that gentle current, you stop steering. In line at a cafe, one person leans just slightly too close. Their voice dances in a rhythm that feels rehearsed yet effortless. You laugh, because somehow they always know the right thing to say. There's a magnetism there, but not all magnets are friendly. Do you think people really change? The question came out of nowhere. Sometimes, you said, if they want to. They smiled. That's what I thought you'd say. And just like that, you're folded into their story before you've written your own lines. That's the trick of charm. It moves quickly, building emotional bridges over rivers that haven't even been crossed. You feel special, seen, even necessary. But beneath that glow, there might be a map with your name written in the margins, not to understand you, but to reach something else through you. It's easy to believe in chemistry when it's choreographed so well, but connection takes time, not tempo. And when someone gives you the sensation of closeness without the steps that build trust, you're left with a warmth that doesn't keep you safe, only still. There's a subtle cost to these encounters. You begin adjusting yourself to remain within the light. You become softer around their edges, bending toward their approval without realizing. And when they turn away, that glow disappears as quickly as it arrived, leaving a cold that wasn't yours to begin with. Somewhere between the compliments and coincidences, you may wonder, was I chosen for who I am, or for how I make them feel? Let that question linger. Let it settle into the quiet. Because real connection doesn't sparkle, it roots. And anything that shines too soon may be lighting the way not to your heart, but through it. So, if their presence feels too perfect too fast, it's okay to slow down. The truth doesn't always arrive in charm. Sometimes it waits in the quiet that follows. And now, with that glow dimming gently in the distance, we drift into a softer trick still. The confession that isn't quite real, but feels like it is. The strategic vulnerability. It begins so softly. A story, a scar, a sigh. Someone shares a piece of themselves with you. Not too deep, just enough to stir your empathy. You lean in, you respond, and just like that, the door to your own guarded thought swings open. But not all vulnerability is sacred. Some of it is staged, measured, a performance, where each pause is rehearsed, and each tear knows its cue. You feel it anyway, because you're kind, because you care, and because your brain is wired to mirror what it sees. Do you ever feel like the world only listens when you're hurting? Someone might say, eyes lowered, voice soft like dusk. You nod, not because you agree, but because you recognize the feeling. And that moment, when your nod becomes a confession, that's the axis where gentle trust turns into quiet leverage. I once told someone about my dad walking out. A voice drifts in the dark. It wasn't to connect. It was to watch how they'd respond. And when they opened up, I knew I had them. The voice isn't proud, just factual, like someone reading a weather report. See, there's a kind of manipulation that doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't force or frighten. It just reveals a wound and waits. And in that waiting, it listens, it collects, it prepares. Not all who share are hunters, but some know that bleeding first makes others bleed back. It's not about pain. It's about positioning. The one who opens up first frames the stage, decides the tone, controls the tempo. And if their story is crafted well enough, your truth slips out as a mirror to their fiction. You thought it was mutual exposure, but maybe it was extraction. A couple talks in the quiet of a hallway. One says, "I don't usually talk about this, but last winter, it got really dark for me." The other, feeling honored, opens their chest in return. A few weeks later, what they shared becomes currency in a cold argument. Was it ever real? When someone opens the door to their world, ask yourself this: did they invite you in, or did they already have a use for your footprints? It's disorienting, isn't it? Because vulnerability feels so human, and most of the time, it is. But manipulation doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it wears a bruise. The most effective actors never appear to act. And that's the quiet brilliance of this trick. It disarms you not with pressure, but with permission. Permission to be soft, to be real, to speak. And by the time you realize it wasn't a two-way street, you've already crossed the bridge. This isn't about paranoia. It's about presence. Because in relationships, especially new ones, timing is telling. When vulnerability comes too soon, too smoothly, too curated, it might not be intimacy. It might be strategy. And yet, this doesn't mean you shouldn't open. But perhaps you wait a moment longer, not out of fear, out of wisdom. Because some stories are lanterns and others are bait. Let your heart be open, yes. But keep your compass sharp. Now, let's drift a little further, toward the illusion of abundance, where choices multiply like stars. But clarity dims like the moon behind clouds. The overload game. It begins innocently enough, like browsing a menu with too many pages. You sit with a sense of power, believing you're in control because of all the options laid before you. But the more you read, the more you hesitate. First excitement, then confusion, then a quiet panic. Every choice is a door. Every door might be the wrong one. This is the subtle machinery of choice overload, where freedom becomes a labyrinth. When everything is on the table, your mind starts to spin. Not because you're weak, but because too many options create a false sense of empowerment. Decision fatigue sets in like fog on a windshield, slowly blurring your ability to think clearly. And in that moment of exhaustion, a soft voice whispers, "Maybe just pick this one." It's simpler. Manipulation often hides in generosity. By flooding you with options, someone can mask control as freedom. You feel overwhelmed, so you begin to crave simplicity. That craving is predictable, and manipulators exploit it. They guide you, without force, without blame, to the choice they always wanted you to make. The trick isn't in the limit, it's in the illusion of boundless opportunity. "I thought you liked options," she says with a smile. "I do," he replies, hesitating, "but I don't even know what I want anymore." "That's okay." She shrugs, sliding one option forward ever so gently. "Maybe start here?" He nods, grateful but not sure why, relieved but unaware of the quiet steering underneath. It's a dance between chaos and calm. When the mind is cluttered, the first clear voice sounds like wisdom. But clarity offered during confusion is rarely neutral. It's strategic. The modern world is built on this game. We scroll endlessly, swipe compulsively, and shop through infinite tabs. And yet, despite the abundance, we often feel emptier. Not because we lack opportunity, but because too much opportunity steals focus. So here lies the question. If the ability to choose feels like a burden, are we still choosing? Because when manipulation is elegant, it doesn't shout. It floods, then waits. Let's breathe now, slow and deep. In the quiet that follows, we'll explore a stranger kind of control, the art of waiting, where silence is not surrender, but a sharpened pause. The delay tactic, a gentle descent into the manipulation of time. There are moments when nothing seems to happen, and yet everything is shifting. Not in your favor, not in your control. A space is created, empty, silent, wide, and you begin to fill it with questions. Why the pause? Why the stillness? Why the sudden vanishing of clarity? You reach for meaning, but your hand meets fog. In this quiet pocket of hesitation, manipulators thrive. They don't need to shout or argue. All they have to do is wait. Not waiting like patience, waiting like a trap. You ask for an answer, and none comes. You send a message, and hours pass, then a day, then two. Each hour grows heavier, and your confidence starts to melt like ice left in the dark. At first, you believe you're just giving them space. Later, you wonder if you've done something wrong. Then, without even knowing it, you're the one who returns, apologizing for something you never did, just to fill the silence. There's a kind of ache that comes from being suspended. It's not pain like fire. It's pain like drifting, like floating in water you didn't know was rising around you. And eventually, you start calling that water normal. Two strangers sit at a bus stop. One speaks. She hasn't texted back since yesterday. Do you think I should follow up? The other shrugs gently, not looking up. Sometimes the quietest answer is still an answer. It's true, isn't it? The longer the delay, the more power the silence holds. The manipulator knows you'll grow more eager with time, more willing to accept less. What once would have seemed unfair now feels like relief. Even crumbs feel like kindness when you've been starving for certainty. But what's more dangerous is how delay turns into self-doubt. You begin to reinterpret the whole conversation, searching for the wrong step you might have taken. You shrink your needs. You edit your words. You wonder if maybe you were too much or not enough. And then, when the reply finally comes, just a small sentence, maybe even a one-word answer, it hits like a warm light. Not because it's generous, but because the cold was so long. You don't even realize you're grateful for something that barely counts as communication. And that's how power flips. The manipulator gives nothing and is still thanked. A gentle barista wipes the counter and speaks to a customer who's been staring into space. Sorry for the delay. Waiting makes everything feel longer, doesn't it? The customer smiles faintly, almost embarrassed. Yeah. It does something to the mind. You forget what you were waiting for. In the delay, your standards shift. You recalibrate your worth to match the silence. And when something, anything, finally happens, you accept it not because it's right, but because you're tired of the wait. That's the game. And it doesn't need conflict, just quiet. So the question floats gently in the dark. When someone makes you wait without care or clarity, are you still making a choice or just clinging to the first hand that reaches back? The room softens again. The thoughts slow. we've sat long enough in stillness. Let's now step toward a stranger truth, when the reflection you see is no longer yours. The twisted empathy. There's a moment, quiet, almost too quiet, when you open your heart to someone. You speak, maybe tremble a little and reveal something raw, and they nod, they tilt their head, they say the perfect phrase, "I totally understand." You feel seen, you breathe, but somehow, it starts to feel like your pain is no longer yours. Twisted empathy is not a loud monster. It's a mirror wrapped in velvet. It mimics kindness, wears the face of someone listening, but behind the surface, it's steering the wheel. When someone claims to understand your struggle, not to soothe you, but to redirect your emotions, that is the shift. It begins subtly, a comforting hand, a shared sigh. Then comes the pivot. You know, maybe if you hadn't said that, they wouldn't have reacted that way. Or worse, I just feel like your pain is hurting me now. Suddenly, you're apologizing for your sadness. Is it just me? She asks. Or does it feel like when he listens, it's more about how you feel, not why you feel? Exactly, he replies, pulling his blanket higher. It's like he turns my sadness into something I owe him. I end up saying sorry for being human. It's empathy laced with a leash. The manipulator isn't offering shelter for your emotion. They're rerouting it. They step into your story only to rewrite the ending. You speak of betrayal, they agree, then gently plant the seed that maybe you provoked it. You express fear and they echo it, then make you feel guilty for making them feel bad. This isn't comfort, it's choreography. And yet, how can something that feels so warm be so cold underneath? That's the power of twisted empathy. It confuses the heart. It hijacks the softest parts of your being, the desire to be understood, to feel held, and uses them to steer your behavior. You want to protect them. You don't want to be too much. So you shrink. If someone feels what you feel, the whisper returns, but turns it against you. Are they still listening or quietly leading? In this space of half-truth comfort, you start to doubt your own reactions. Are you overreacting? Being too sensitive? The more you try to check in with yourself, the less sure you become. Because the one who claims to understand you has already rewritten the map, and the road now points away from your truth and toward their control. Let's take a breath now. Let's return to silence, but not the kind that invites peace. The next stillness we meet is more subtle, more slippery. It's not absence, it's avoidance. And that, too, has its voice. The strategic silence. There's a kind of silence that doesn't soothe. It hums like a wire, tight and expectant. It's not absence, it's arrangement. When someone withdraws their voice, not in anger but with precision, they turn the air itself into a pressure chamber. And you, standing in that stillness, begin to speak. You fill the gap. You offer up pieces of yourself, not because you want to, but because the vacuum asks for it. Two friends sit on a porch swing as dusk stretches across the lawn. One is quiet, sipping slowly. The other shifts in their seat, unsure. Did I say something wrong? Silence. I didn't mean it that way. I was just tired. Still silence. Okay, I'm sorry. The swing creaks. Nothing more. The apology wasn't pulled by words. It was grown from the discomfort of unspoken space. That's how strategic silence works. It isn't hostile. It's measured. A silence with posture, tilted just enough to suggest disapproval, uncertainty, or disappointment. And it's you who scrambles to interpret it. Your mind rushes to bridge the gap. Was it your tone? That thing you said earlier? Did you cross a line? And in that mental storm, you offer clarity, justification, perhaps even surrender, all unprompted. It's not that they hold power through what they say. It's that they hold power through what they withhold. Their stillness makes you a narrator of your own guilt, even when no accusation is spoken. You begin to confess not because you're guilty, but because silence made you feel like you might be. A man once said to his partner over dinner, "I thought things were fine today." She only looked at her plate, breathing calmly. He added, "Unless something's wrong?" She didn't nod, didn't shake her head. So he continued, trying to dig through the fog, offering explanations like breadcrumbs. In the end, she never had to ask for anything. He gave it all willingly, just to end the silence. What makes this so quietly manipulative is its elegance. There's no shouting, no name-calling, no visible blame. And yet it works. Because silence is not a blank page. It's a mirror that reflects your own uncertainty. The less they say, the more you search inside yourself. And that searching often leads to bending, offering, yielding, just for the relief of being heard again. But ask yourself gently, if someone never asked and you still gave, whose decision was it really? If their quiet gaze made you doubt your own stance, is that connection or control? Some silences are sacred. They let truth breathe. But others are bait. And when you chase them with your words, you become the story they never had to write. So as you close your eyes tonight, feel the spaces in your own life, where silence is peace, and where it's a script you've been quietly rewriting for someone else. And now, let's drift towards something more ancient, a tactic dressed in strategy, a method of power passed down through kingdoms and cliques alike, the quiet splitting of loyalty. The next segment waits with a whisper: divide and conquer. Divide and control. Sometimes power doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't crush or conquer or storm the gates. Instead, it whispers, it nudges, it divides, and through that division, it conquers quietly. There's a peculiar chill that creeps in when you begin to feel disconnected. At first, it's subtle, a missed message, a changed tone, a look between friends you didn't understand. You wonder if you're imagining it, but over time, the distance grows, conversations shift, trust frays. The world that once felt full of connections now feels like a fogged mirror. Familiar shapes blurred, edges softened by isolation. In the hands of a manipulator, this fragmentation is not an accident. It is intention masked as coincidence. They may plant small doubts, little just thought you should know moments that seem harmless, but each one pulls at the seams of your relationships. A friend becomes a rival. A confidant becomes suspect. You start to wonder who is really on your side. In the stillness of that doubt, control moves in like smoke through cracks. "I don't talk to her much anymore," someone says over tea, fingers wrapped around a mug they don't sip from. "Why not?" "She said something. I don't know. Just didn't sit right with me." And he agreed. "Who's he?" A pause. "Just someone I trust." That's the trick, isn't it? You feel like you're making your own choices, but the stage was already set. The trust was redirected. The bonds were weakened not with scissors, but with silence and suspicion. Because when you're isolated, you become more pliable. There's no one to challenge the narrative you're given. No voice to remind you of your strength, your worth, or the full picture. You begin to second-guess your instincts. And when you finally do reach out, maybe the bridge has already been burned, or worse, made to look like you were the one who struck the match. Manipulators thrive in the quiet space between people. They don't need to be louder than the crowd, only quieter than your doubts. And what's most tragic is that sometimes we cooperate. We pull away, thinking it's self-protection, not realizing that someone else designed the maze, someone who benefits from us standing alone. If you've ever felt like you're losing your circle, your people, your clarity, ask yourself, is this truly my choice, or a result of someone else's plan? There is a reason wolves separate sheep from the herd. A lone voice is easier to steer. A scattered mind is easier to mold. Unity resists control, but divide it, and it becomes a whisper waiting to be told what to believe. And now we move even deeper into a colder manipulation, one that doesn't lie outright, but questions truth until it crumbles under the weight of uncertainty. The infinite doubt loop. In the quiet hours of the night, when thoughts feel heavier than usual, there's a strange loop that some people find themselves trapped inside, a mental maze with no exit signs. It's called the infinite doubt loop. At first glance, it might seem like simple overthinking, but look closer, and you'll notice something more deliberate. This isn't a natural process of careful reflection. It's a design, subtle, manipulative, and deeply exhausting. Imagine trying to walk forward on a floor that constantly shifts beneath you. Every time you take a step, the surface slides just a little, not enough to knock you down, but enough to make you question whether you're moving in the right direction. That's what it feels like when someone keeps asking, "Are you sure?" over and over again. Not because they want to help you think, but because they want to help you doubt. Do you really remember it that way? I'm just saying, doesn't that sound a little off? I mean, if you think that's true, okay. These are not questions seeking clarity, they're seeds. And when planted in just the right emotional soil, those seeds grow into thorns. They pierce your confidence slowly. They whisper in your mind even after the conversation ends. You begin to second guess what you saw, what you felt, what you decided. And slowly, your sense of direction fades. Two people sit on a bench beneath a dim streetlight, sharing coffee in paper cups. One of them says, "I told her how I felt finally. It felt like the right thing to do." The other leans back, thoughtful. But how do you know it was really the right thing? Feelings can be tricky. The first one pauses, the warmth of certainty fading from their face. I guess I don't know. Not anymore. That is the loop beginning. Innocent enough, almost friendly. But over time, it spirals. You look back at your memories, your beliefs, and your relationships, not with the curiosity of growth, but with the fear of having been wrong all along. And here's the twist. The person who starts this loop doesn't have to offer an alternative. They don't need to say what is true. They just need to keep you circling what might not be. The goal isn't persuasion, it's paralysis. Because a person who doubts everything can commit to nothing, and a person who commits to nothing is easy to lead. In such a space, reality becomes liquid. Facts lose their footing. Even your emotions feel suspicious. When that happens, who do you become? What part of yourself do you still trust? If your mind is the compass, and someone's been spinning the needle for days, what direction do you believe? A quiet voice might rise within you. If nothing is stable, what do I grab when the world shakes? That's the heart of it. In a world where every certainty has been painted in shades of gray, you start reaching for anything that feels solid, even if that solid ground is the very voice that unsteadied you in the first place. Clarity doesn't come from constant questioning. It comes from listening to the stillness underneath all the noise. The doubt loop is not broken by more thinking. It's broken by reclaiming your inner anchor. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to soften into dreams, let the spinning stop. Let silence be a friend, not a trick. And in the hush that follows, we'll take a gentle turn back to the rhythm of timing, not to question it, but to feel it, to trust when to move and when to wait. Too early, too late. There's something hauntingly quiet about timing, not the ticking of a clock or the buzzing of an alarm. This is a rhythm deeper than that. It lives in the pauses between thoughts, in the way a sentence waits, and then lands exactly when your guard blinks. And when it does, you feel it, like the soft footstep of a cat crossing your chest in the night. Barely there, but somehow undeniable. She asked, "Did he mean it? Or did he just say it because I was falling asleep?" He shrugged. Sometimes the truth depends on when it's told. Timing doesn't just change how words feel, it changes what they mean. A warning whispered weeks before disaster sounds paranoid. The same words spoken 5 minutes after everything collapses, they sound prophetic. And when someone comforts you after you've already picked up the pieces, their tenderness doesn't heal. It stings, not because they didn't speak, but because they waited. Manipulators don't always lie. Often they choose a more elegant weapon. When? A compliment dropped in the quiet lull of doubt. A suggestion murmured after you failed. A concern shared only when it no longer threatens them. It's not the words that do the work. It's their entrance, their arrival, their perfect little cue. There's a kind of theater to it, isn't there? And in this performance, you're not watching the show. You are the show. They know when you're hungry, tired, grateful, guilty, and they time their lines accordingly. Not too early, not too late. Just right. So right, in fact, that it doesn't feel planned. It feels natural, organic, like it grew out of the moment. But it didn't. It was planted. "Have you noticed," she said, stirring her tea slowly, "that he always texts when I'm weakest? Maybe he just cares," her friend offered gently. "No," she replied, eyes fixed on the steam rising. "He waits until I'm too tired to argue." When comfort is late, it doesn't soothe. When urgency is early, it doesn't spark action. And when someone constantly appears at just the right emotional window, the odds are slim that it's kindness. It's more likely calculation. They don't push you. They pace you. Because your rhythm, if learned well enough, becomes a map. And maps, once owned, give away everything. It's subtle, this tactic. So subtle, it often gets mistaken for care. A soft word after your voice breaks. A promise when you've run out of options. Even silence, timed just right, becomes thunder. "Funny," he said, watching the traffic lights flicker in the dark. "She always calls after I've made up my mind, not before. Maybe she doesn't want to sway you. Or maybe she wants to make sure I walk alone first." If you've ever felt a chill when someone arrived at your emotional doorstep too precisely, don't dismiss it. Patterns are invisible until they repeat, and repetition reveals rhythm, and rhythm reveals rehearsal. Because timing, in its purest form, is a mirror. And when someone always arrives right on cue, the question isn't just how they knew, but why they waited. And now, we drift towards something even quieter than timing. A realm where words don't direct you, but merely suggest. Not action, just a nudge, an idea, a possibility placed in the wind. Let's step gently into the whisper of influence, where the strongest push is the one you didn't feel. The implanted choice. It begins with a whisper, not in your ear, but in the folds of your mind. A gentle phrase, casually delivered. Wouldn't it be easier if you just... It doesn't sound like a command. It doesn't demand obedience. It sounds like something you might have said to yourself. And maybe that's the point. In the soft hours of our lives, when we are not paying close attention, suggestions sneak in, not through confrontation, but through comfort. A friend leans across the table, a coworker offers an innocent opinion, or a loved one tilts the conversation with just the right question. No pressure, no persuasion. Just a small seed dropped into your thinking. It feels organic. You water it yourself. Later, when you act on it, you won't remember where it came from. You'll think it bloomed inside you. Hey, do you think I should quit this project? Well, she says, I mean, wouldn't it be less stressful if you did? And just like that, the path opens in your mind. A new lane of thought. You nod. Yeah, I guess it is my decision. But was it? The most effective manipulation doesn't come with a push. It comes with a mirror, one that reflects back a version of your own logic, but slightly shifted. Not enough to notice, just enough to redirect. The suggestion becomes so entangled in your thoughts that when you act, it feels voluntary. And this is the artistry of the implanted choice. What's dangerous is not the control, it's the illusion of autonomy. When someone makes you do something you think you wanted, the result is quiet compliance without resistance. No internal alarms go off, no gut feeling warns you. And yet, something inside you knows the origin wasn't entirely yours. In the still moments, when you look back on the decision, you might wonder, why did I do that really? But by then, the moment has passed. The choice has been made. The manipulator smiles, not because they forced you, but because they didn't have to. Do you ever wonder if that job you turned down was really your idea? Not really. I mean, my friend just said it seemed too risky, and I realized I didn't want it. Right, but would you have realized that if they hadn't said anything? A pause, a breath. I don't know. And that's the quiet haunting of the implanted choice. Not regret, not resistance, just uncertainty. The subtle erosion of ownership over your life. The manipulation lies not in what you did, but in the invisible string that led you there. So now, as the room dims and your breath slows, ask yourself gently, if every choice carries a shadow whose hand held the light, let us now drift further inward, leaving behind the mind's tangled vines, and enter the soft, soundless theater, where emotions play their own quiet games. Emotional framing. Sometimes it's not what you're told, but how the room feels when you're told it. A soft lamp in the corner, a voice that trembles at just the right word, a pause, long enough for your heart to fill in the gaps. That's how the truth is reshaped, not rewritten, just repainted in a different hue. One person says, he left because he had to. Another says, he abandoned her. Same moment, same man, but now your chest feels tight in one version and forgiving in the other. Emotional framing works like tinted glasses, sliding over your mind without asking, altering the color of what you see. The facts don't move, but your compass does. That shift isn't always loud. It can whisper through the tone of a memory, through a smile that says, you know what I mean, even when you don't. Two people stood at a train platform once. One looked up at the arrival screen and said with a grin, finally, you're going to get your happy ending. The other tilted their head, eyes soft. Or maybe It's just the beginning of something you'll need to recover from. Same train, same ticket. But now, the ride feels different. Emotional framing doesn't need lies. It only needs angles. And some people become masters at holding up the mirror just so you see yourself in the light they prefer. They highlight what hurts when they want sympathy, or shine gold on a broken promise to make it feel noble. A pause before a phrase, a sigh right after. These are cues, not content, yet they guide our feelings more than we admit. You might recall a time when someone told you a story with trembling hands, and though the story wasn't yours, you carried it like it was. Why? Because they framed it not with logic, but longing. Because the room felt sad, and you thought that meant it was real. But here's the twist. Emotions are real, yet they don't always point to the truth. They point to experience. And when experience is shaped by someone else's intention, you might find yourself standing in a museum of feelings, admiring someone else's brushstrokes. One evening, a woman in a red scarf leaned across a cafe table and said, "I just wanted you to feel how I felt." And the man replied, "But what if I feel it too deeply and forget what actually happened?" This is the cost of emotional framing. When every retelling adds a violin or dims the light, when every explanation becomes a performance, truth slips from solid ground into water. You feel like you're drowning in a story, but don't remember when you started swimming. And yet, we crave emotion. We want connection. We're not wrong for listening with our hearts, but if every fact is served with a spoonful of sugar or acid, can we really say we're tasting the truth? So, tonight, as your thoughts begin to slow and stretch out like shadows across your pillow, notice the memories that make you pause. Ask gently, "Did I feel that? Or was I meant to?" And if the answer is unclear, that's okay. We're not here to judge our minds. We're here to cradle them. Let us now drift softly to the penultimate realm, where boundaries blur, where self and other begin to entwine, and the edges of intention grow harder to hold. Blurring the boundary. It begins with something small, an innocent favor, a harmless request, a moment where you choose connection over your own comfort, because it feels kind, loyal, or even loving. That's how the line begins to blur, not with a sharp cut, but with a soft erosion. Manipulators rarely storm your boundaries. They gently brush against them, wearing them down with warmth, with phrases like, "Just this once," or "You're the only one I trust." And before you know it, your no has become a maybe. Your maybe becomes a silent yes, and your needs start to disappear into theirs. Wouldn't you do this for someone who loves you? That's how it's framed. Love, loyalty, closeness, all noble things, all easily twisted. In their hands, your compassion becomes a leash. Your empathy becomes a tool. And slowly, your own voice begins to dim beneath the constant hum of someone else's desire. One night, maybe after work, you sit down, exhausted, and realize you have no time that's truly your own, no space untouched. Every decision is a calculation. Will this upset them? Will saying no ruin everything? That question echoes, and it haunts you more than any argument ever could. A conversation between two tired souls might capture it best. "Hey, do you ever feel like you're giving too much?" "I don't know. I thought that's what love was, giving everything." But what if they never stop taking? That's the moment of awakening. The realization that love without boundaries isn't love. It's submission. That if you're always the one bending, always the one erasing your needs to preserve the peace, then the peace was never shared. It was bought with your silence. And so we ask, if you can't say no, are you truly saying yes? Or are you disappearing behind the illusion of agreement? As we move forward, breathe deeply. Let this awareness settle. Because next comes the final strand, the manipulation so quiet, so invisible. It doesn't steal from you outright. It invites you to forget yourself. Erasing the self. You don't notice it at first. That subtle shift, the way you pause before speaking, scanning their face for a signal, an approving nod, a quiet smile, before continuing. You used to say things without needing to check. But now, there's an invisible gate between your thoughts and your mouth, and someone else is holding the key. It never starts with cruelty. There are no harsh orders, no sharp insults, just warmth, a hand on your back, a voice that says, I just want what's best for us. And at first, that sounds beautiful. Us feels safer than me. But slowly, me begins to shrink like a shoreline eaten by the tide. Your favorite song? It doesn't play anymore. Their playlist takes over. You switch the station without thinking. Your food preferences, your daily rituals, your little quirks, they become topics of gentle jokes, moments to be improved. You laugh along. It's easier that way. In a small kitchen somewhere, two people make tea. One reaches for sugar. The other says, "Didn't you stop using that?" There's a moment, a blink, and the hand retracts. Right. I guess I did. The change seems harmless, even helpful. But it isn't just about sugar. It's about who gets to decide what sweetness tastes like. This is the erosion. Not a storm, not a landslide, but a quiet wind, persistent and patient. It smooths your edges until you forget you ever had them. Their dreams become yours, their preferences, their politics, their pace of living, all absorbed so completely you forget they were once foreign. And one morning, brushing your teeth, you glance in the mirror and can't quite recall your favorite color. Not because it's vanished, but because someone else's favorite is louder in your mind. Sometimes the clues whisper in everyday life, like when someone orders for you at a restaurant and you don't object, or when you hesitate to buy something simple because they might not like it. It's not that you're forbidden, it's that you've internalized their judgment as your compass. There's no alarm bell for this kind of fading, no loud warning, just little silences growing between your wants and your words. And by the time you ask yourself, what do I really want? The answer feels distant, like a name on the tip of your tongue that you haven't spoken in years. But that doesn't make you weak. It makes you beautifully, vulnerably human. And now, you've seen it. You've walked alongside the shadows of subtle influence, not to fear them, but to recognize them. And that is the first act of return. The self is not lost forever. It's simply been sleeping. So take this final breath with gentleness. Let the echoes fade. Let the borrowed thoughts go silent. You are not them. You never were. And in this softness, this slow exhale of night, you are invited to choose again, not into control, not into confusion, but into peace. And if your eyes grow heavy now, let them. Not because someone asked you to, but because you want to. And now, the thread returns to your hand. One by one, we've walked through a gallery of shadows, each subtle, each familiar. Not villains in capes, but gentle distortions in the mirror, smiles that mislead, silences that suffocate, words that wound but only after they sound sweet. Did you notice how easily the mind can be bent when it only wants peace? But here, in this stillness, you don't need to fix anything. You don't need to resist. You simply watch, breathe, release, Maybe that's the final trick, realizing that not every illusion needs to be broken. Some only ask to be seen, so they can dissolve. So close your eyes now, not in surrender, but in presence. Let the questions fade like echoes in a canyon. You are not here to solve everything. You are here to rest. Good night, traveler of thought. The mind will wander, but tonight, it does so in peace.